true scary stories for sleep. Welcome to the Midnight Echoes. Before we dive into tonight's stories, I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. It's always fascinating to see where our viewers are tuning in from. If you enjoy the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, unwind, and prepare for tonight's eerie adventures. The old manor on the outskirts of town had always been the subject of local lore and ghost stories. Its once grand architecture was now shrouded in ivy and decay, but its history held a macabre allure. When a young couple decided to renovate the manor and turn it into a bed and breakfast, they were eager to restore its former glory. Little did they know, the manor harbored a dark secret that would soon reveal itself in the most unsettling of ways. As the renovation work began, the couple noticed strange occurrences that seemed to defy logic. The sound of footsteps echoing through empty halls and cold drafts in rooms with no open windows were just the beginning. The workers reported seeing fleeting figures out of the corner of their eyes and hearing whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. It was clear that something was amiss in the manor, but the couple brushed off these incidents as the quirks of an old building. The situation took a darker turn when the couple moved into the manor before the renovations were completed. The disturbances grew more pronounced, with objects moving on their own and doors slamming shut with no apparent cause. The once cozy and inviting manor had become a place of constant unease, its atmosphere heavy with a sense of foreboding. Each night brought new and increasingly chilling phenomena, as if the manor itself was alive and angry. One evening, the couple explored the hidden corners of the manor. They discovered an old diary tucked away in a dusty, forgotten drawer. The diary belonged to a former resident of the manor, who had chronicled a series of tragic events that had unfolded within its walls. The entries spoke of betrayal, loss, and a vengeful spirit that had terrorized the household. The couple's unease grew as they realized that the events described in the diary mirrored the disturbances they were experiencing. Determined to uncover the truth, the couple delved deeper into the manor's history and discovered a series of tragic events tied to its past. The manor had once been the site of a brutal murder, where a wealthy family had been slaughtered by a disgruntled servant. The details matched the eerie occurrences they had been experiencing, and it became evident that the spirit of the vengeful servant was haunting the manor. As they continued their investigation, the couple found evidence suggesting that the spirit was not content with its current state. The disturbances escalated, violent poltergeist activity and terrifying apparitions becoming a nightly occurrence. The couple found themselves increasingly isolated and distressed, unable to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the manor. Desperate for relief, the couple sought the help of a paranormal expert to perform a cleansing ritual. The expert's arrival brought a sense of hope, but also a new level of tension. The ritual seemed to provoke the spirit, leading to an intense confrontation between the living and the dead. The manor's walls seemed to close in, and the air crackled with malevolent energy as the expert worked to pacify the restless spirit. The cleansing ritual reached its climax as the spirit's presence grew overwhelmingly strong. The manor shook with the force of the spirit's rage, and the couple feared for their lives. In the midst of the turmoil, the expert managed to perform the final rites, and a sudden, eerie calm settled over the manor. The spirit seemed to have been subdued, but the experience left the couple with a lasting sense of dread and a deeper understanding of the manor's dark past. The shadowed mansion stood at the edge of the fog-shrouded village, its towering spires and Gothic architecture casting long, foreboding shadows over the landscape. Built in the early 1800s, it had long been abandoned, its windows boarded up, and its gates rusted shut. When a wealthy investor purchased the mansion with plans to restore it to its former glory, little did he realize that the mansion's dark past would soon make itself known in the most unsettling ways. From the moment restoration began, the workers reported a series of unnerving experiences. Tools would vanish without a trace, only to reappear in places where they had not been left. Strange noises, like the sound of footsteps echoing through empty halls, became a frequent occurrence. As the work continued, the mansion seemed to resist the changes, with doors creaking open on their own and windows rattling despite there being no breeze. The investor, eager to see the mansion restored, dismissed the workers' concerns as the result of old plumbing and faulty wiring. However, his skepticism was challenged when he spent his first night alone in the mansion. He was awakened by the sensation of icy fingers brushing against his skin, and saw shadows flitting across the walls, dancing in the flickering light of his candle. It was as though the mansion itself was alive and watching his every move. Determined to uncover the source of these disturbances, the investor began to investigate the mansion's history. He discovered that the mansion had been the scene of a series of tragic events: family massacre, mysterious disappearances, and rumors of occult practice. The deeper he delved, the more he realized that the mansion's previous occupants had left behind a legacy of darkness and malevolence that had permeated its very foundations. One night, while exploring the mansion's forgotten cellar, the investor stumbled upon a hidden chamber. Inside, he found a collection of old, ritualistic artifacts and a large, ornate mirror covered in dust. As he approached the mirror, he was overwhelmed by a sudden, suffocating darkness. The reflections within the mirror seemed to twist and writhe, showing him glimpses of the mansion's horrific past and the restless spirits trapped within. The shadows in the mansion grew more aggressive as the investor continued his research. He would hear disembodied voices whispering threats and saw dark figures stalking him through the halls. The once grand and imposing structure now felt like a maze of terror, its corridors and rooms filled with an oppressive, chilling presence. Each night, the shadows seemed to grow more daring, their movements more pronounced. The mansion's oppressive atmosphere began to take a toll on the investor's sanity. He experienced vivid nightmares where he was chased by shadowy figures and saw his own reflection morph into grotesque and terrifying shapes. The line between reality and nightmare began to blur, and he found himself haunted not only by the mansion's past, but also by his own fears and anxieties. In a desperate bid to rid himself of the malevolent forces within the mansion, the investor attempted to perform a cleansing ritual. Armed with ancient texts and ceremonial tools, he sought to banish the spirits and reclaim the mansion's sanctity. However, the ritual seemed only to intensify the spirits' fury, with violent poltergeist activity erupting throughout the mansion. As the final confrontation with the spirits approached, the investor felt a growing sense of dread and resignation. The mansion, with its dark past and relentless shadows, seemed to have claimed him as its latest victim. The walls appeared to close in around him, and the shadows danced with malevolent glee, as if they were celebrating their victory over the intruder who had dared to challenge them. In the end, the mansion remained a symbol of fear and mystery, its secrets buried beneath layers of darkness and despair. The investor's fate was sealed, becoming another ghostly presence in the mansion's long and tragic history. The shadowed mansion stood silent once more, its haunted halls a testament to the darkness that lurks within and the shadows that never truly leave. The forgotten asylum, perched on a desolate hill, had long been the subject of local rumors and ghost stories. Crumbling facade and broken windows told tales of neglect and abandonment, but it was the whispers of its dark history that truly captivated the imagination. When a group of amateur paranormal investigators decided to explore the asylum, they were eager to uncover the truth behind the chilling legends that surrounded it. From the moment they stepped inside, the air in the asylum felt heavy, thick with a sense of dread that seemed to cling to their every move. The walls, lined with peeling paint and graffiti, bore witness to the asylum's once grim purpose. As they ventured deeper, they began to experience unsettling phenomena, cold spots that seemed to follow them, and the eerie sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. It was clear that the asylum held secrets far darker than they had anticipated. The investigators set up their equipment in the main hall hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal activity. Their cameras and recording devices picked up strange sounds, distant screams, hurried footsteps, and the unsettling creak of old doors opening and closing on their own. The recordings were filled with a low, continuous hum that seemed to resonate with a haunting undertone. Each sound added to the mounting tension, revealing a presence that was both ominous and malevolent. As they explored the asylum's various wings, they came across remnants of its troubled past. Empty patient rooms, with their broken furniture and faded restraints, were a stark reminder of the suffering that had occurred within these walls. In one particularly disturbing room, they found an old journal detailing the inhumane experiments conducted on patients, experiments that had left lasting scars on both the asylum and its inhabitants. The discovery deepened their sense of unease and confirmed the asylum's reputation as a place of dark, haunting history. The investigators' equipment began to malfunction in the asylum, devices flickering and shutting down unexpectedly. Lights dimmed and then flashed erratically, as if being controlled by an unseen force. Shadows danced across the walls, and the temperature dropped suddenly, creating an atmosphere of intense discomfort. The group's nerves were on edge as they realized that the asylum's ghostly inhabitants were becoming more active and aggressive. One of the investigators, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion, ventured into the basement, a part of the asylum that had been largely untouched. In the dim light of their flashlight, they found an old, rusted door that seemed to lead to a hidden underground area. As they opened the door, a wave of rancid air and the overpowering scent of decay hit them. The basement was a labyrinth of dark corridors, filled with old medical equipment and strange markings that suggested sinister practices had been conducted there. As they ventured further into the basement, the investigators encountered a series of disturbing visions and experiences. The air became thick with an oppressive darkness, and they began to see ghostly figures, pale, emaciated faces peering out from the shadows. The figures seemed to reach out, their ghostly hands grasping for something beyond their grasp. The investigators were overwhelmed by a sense of hopelessness and despair, as if they were witnessing the remnants of the asylum's darkest moments. Hilltop Manor had always stood out in the town of Ravensbridge with its majestic architecture and sprawling grounds. Despite its grandeur, the manor had fallen into disrepair over the years. Once lush gardens now overgrown, and its grand halls cloaked in dust. When a wealthy family decided to restore the manor to its former splendor, they were eager to revive its old charm. Little did they know, the manor's past held a chilling secret that would soon unravel before their eyes. The restoration team began their work, but from the start they encountered strange occurrences. The old, creaky floorboards would echo with footsteps, even when no one was around. The sounds of doors slamming shut and whispers in the dark became a common part of their daily routine. The workers tried to dismiss these as mere quirks of an old building, but the atmosphere in the manor grew increasingly unsettling. Families soon moved in, hoping that their presence might dispel the unsettling occurrences. However, the disturbances continued, and their nights were plagued by unexplained noises and eerie sensations. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and the once beautiful manor felt more like a labyrinth of terror. The family's attempts to ignore or rationalize the events only seemed to escalate the haunting. One night, the family discovered an old journal hidden in a dusty attic trunk. The journal belonged to a former resident of the manor and detailed a series of tragic events that had occurred there. The entry spoke of betrayals, lost love, and a vengeful spirit that had taken residence in the manor. As they read the journal, the family realized that the haunting was more than just a series of coincidences. It was tied to the manor's dark history. The family decided to investigate further, delving into the manor's history and uncovering more about its previous occupants. They learned that the manor had been the site of a tragic love affair that ended in betrayal and murder. The story matched the eerie occurrences they had been experiencing, suggesting that the spirit of the wronged lover was seeking revenge. As the haunting intensified, family began to experience more terrifying phenomena. Objects would move on their own, and the temperature in the manor would plummet without warning. The once grand rooms were now filled with an oppressive atmosphere, and the family felt as though they were constantly being watched. The ghostly presence became more active, with apparitions appearing and disappearing in the corners of their vision. Desperate for answers, the family sought the help of a paranormal expert. The expert conducted a thorough investigation and confirmed the presence of a malevolent spirit connected to the manor's tragic past. The findings indicated that the spirit was not only lingering, but also growing stronger with each passing day. The expert's revelations only heightened the family's fear and desperation. The Vanishing Hotel, a once opulent establishment on the edge of a bustling city, had fallen into obscurity. Grand architecture and luxurious interiors had become faded relics of a bygone era. When a new owner decided to renovate the hotel and reopen it to the public, they were eager to restore its former glory. However, the renovation quickly took a turn for the bizarre and unsettling. As construction crews worked to breathe new life into the hotel, they began to encounter strange occurrences. Pools would go missing, only to reappear in the most unexpected places. The workers reported hearing eerie noises, like the distant clinking of glasses and the sound of laughter, despite the hotel being completely empty. It became apparent that something was amiss, but the new owner remained optimistic, believing these were just the quirks of an old building. The first guests to stay in the newly reopened hotel were met with an eerie atmosphere. Some rooms seemed to have a chilling presence, cold drafts that couldn't be explained by the air conditioning. Guests reported strange occurrences, such as items disappearing from their rooms, and the sensation of being watched. Despite the hotel's attempts to reassure its guests, the unsettling experiences persisted. One night, a guest decided to explore the hotel's forgotten basement, which had been left largely untouched during the renovation. To their horror, they discovered a hidden, decrepit area filled with dusty old furnishings and abandoned belongings. The basement seemed to hold an oppressive darkness, and the guest felt an overwhelming sense of dread as they ventured deeper. The area appeared to have been untouched for decades, yet it exuded an aura of malevolence. The guest's discovery led to a series of chilling events. As more guests experienced unsettling phenomena, rumors began to spread about the hotel's haunted history. Some claimed that the hotel had been the site of mysterious disappearances, guests vanishing without a trace. The once luxurious hotel now felt like a labyrinth of terror, with each corner holding a new, unnerving secret. Reports of ghostly figures and disembodied voices began to circulate among the guests. Some claimed to have seen apparitions of former patrons, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, wandering the hallways. Others reported hearing whispers and footsteps that seemed to come from nowhere. The hotel, once a symbol of luxury and comfort, had transformed into a place of unending horror. In an attempt to understand the source of these disturbances, the new owner began to delve into the hotel's past. They discovered that the hotel had been the scene of several tragic events, including a series of disappearances and deaths that had never been fully explained. The more they uncovered, the more they realized that the hotel's dark past was coming back to haunt its present occupant. As the disturbances continued, the atmosphere in the hotel grew increasingly oppressive. The new owner sought the help of paranormal experts, hoping to put an end to the haunting. However, the experts' investigations only revealed that the hotel's malevolent presence was tied to its troubled history. It became clear that the spirits of those who had vanished were still trapped within the hotel's walls, seeking a way to escape their torment. The final confrontation with the hotel's restless spirits led to a dramatic revelation. The new owner and the paranormal experts uncovered the truth behind the disappearances and the hotel's dark history. It was discovered that the hotel had been built on cursed ground, and its past was forever entwined with the malevolent forces that resided within. Despite their efforts, the hotel's haunting presence remained, leaving a chilling legacy for all who dared to enter. West Virginia is full of winding roads and hidden places. There's one bridge that stands out in everyone's mind, the old iron bridge that crosses over a deep, rocky ravine. Locals have always whispered about it, telling tales of strange occurrences and ghostly apparitions. It's the kind of place you'd avoid at night, but as fate would have it, I found myself driving across it on a late autumn evening. The sky was overcast, and the wind howled through the trees, making the bridge creak as my car rolled onto it. As soon as I hit the middle of the bridge, my headlights flickered and the engine sputtered, sending a chill down my spine. That's when I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the bridge, barely visible through the fog. Figure was dressed in white, her hair blowing in the wind. She looked out over the ravine, completely still, as if she were waiting for something. My heart raced as I pulled over to the side, unsure of what to do. I'd heard the stories, how people had seen a ghostly woman on the bridge, and how she was connected to the many accidents that had happened there over the years. But seeing her in person was something else entirely. I wanted to leave, to drive away and forget what I'd seen, but something compelled me to stay. Find out who she was. I got out of the car, cold wind biting at my skin, and cautiously approached the figure. As I got closer, I could see that she was young, face pale, and her eyes filled with sadness. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even seem to notice I was there. She just stood there, staring down into the ravine as if lost in her own world. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. That's when I noticed something chilling. Her feet weren't touching the ground. She was hovering, just a few inches above the bridge, like a ghost caught between worlds. A wave of fear washed over me, and I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The stories were true. This was the ghostly woman of the bridge. I could feel her sadness, her despair, radiating off her in waves. She was trapped here, bound to this place by something terrible. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't just leave her there, alone in the fog. I had to find out what had happened to her and why she was still here. Over the next few days, I dug into the history of the bridge. What I discovered was haunting. Decades ago, a young woman had been driving across the bridge on a stormy night when she lost control of her car and plunged into the ravine below. She had been on her way to meet her fiancé, but she never made it. Since then, her ghost had been seen by countless drivers, always standing at the edge of the bridge, as if waiting for someone who would never come. The accidents that followed were said to be caused by her presence, as if her sadness was drawing others to the same fate. Determined to help her find peace, I returned to the bridge one final time. It was another foggy evening, just like the first, and I could feel the weight of her presence as soon as I arrived. This time I brought flowers, white roses, the kind she had been carrying on the night of her accident. I placed them at the edge of the bridge, where she had stood, and said a few words for her, hoping she could hear me. The air grew colder, and the wind picked up, but then, suddenly, everything went still. I looked up, and there she was, standing before me once again. But this time something was different. Her face, once filled with sorrow, now seemed peaceful. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw her smile. Slowly, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the mist. As she disappeared, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, as if a great weight had been lifted from the bridge. The air felt lighter, the fog less oppressive, and I knew that she had finally found peace. Since that night, the accidents on the bridge have stopped. The locals still talk about the ghostly woman, but now they say she's gone, finally reunited with the one she was waiting for. The bridge remains a quiet, eerie place, but it no longer holds the same darkness it once did. For me, it's a reminder that some spirits are simply searching for closure, and that sometimes all it takes is a small gesture to help them find it. The Rockies have always been known for their rugged beauty. They can also be unforgiving, especially when you're camping in the middle of nowhere. My friends and I had planned this trip for months, eager to escape the chaos of city life and immerse ourselves in nature. We set up camp near a secluded lake, far from any signs of civilization. The first few days were peaceful, filled with hiking, fishing, and telling stories around the campfire. But on the third day, we decided to explore deeper into the forest, curious about what lay beyond the trail. That's when we stumbled upon the cabin. It wasn't marked on any maps, and there was no sign that anyone had lived there for years. The cabin was old, with weathered wood and a sagging roof, half hidden by the dense trees that surrounded it. It had an eerie, abandoned feel, but something about it drew us in. We stood at the edge of the clearing, debating whether or not to check it out. Curiosity won, as it often does, and we approached cautiously. As we got closer, the air grew colder, and a strange silence fell over the forest. It was as if the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to make the first move. The door creaked open with a haunting groan, revealing a dark, musty interior. Dust hung in the air, and the floorboards creaked under our weight as we stepped inside. The cabin was sparsely furnished, an old table, a couple of chairs, and a rusty stove in the corner. But what caught our attention were the carvings on the walls. They were strange symbols, intricate and unsettling, etched deep into the wood. None of us recognized them, but they gave off a chilling energy that made my skin crawl. Felt like we had stumbled into a place that wasn't meant to be found. As we explored the cabin, we began to notice other oddities. The air inside was frigid, far colder than it should have been, even for the mountains. And there was a strange smell, something sour and rotten, like decaying leaves mixed with something far worse. My friends joked about the place being haunted, but I could tell they were just as uneasy as I was. There was something off about the cabin, something that didn't belong in this world. It was as if the walls were watching us, waiting for us to leave so they could return to their eerie silence. That night, back at our campsite, the atmosphere had changed. The forest, once so peaceful, now felt oppressive, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. The air was heavy, and every sound seemed amplified. The crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a wolf. None of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. Something was out there in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. We tried to laugh it off, but the tension was palpable, and sleep didn't come easily. In the middle of the night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, but when I called out, there was no response. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, circling the campsite. My heart pounded in my chest as I unzipped the tent and peered outside. The campfire had burned down to embers, casting long, eerie shadows across the trees. But there was no one there, just the dark, empty forest. I scanned the area, my breath catching in my throat when I saw it. A faint light in the distance, coming from the direction of the cabin. I woke my friends, and we huddled together, watching the light as it flickered and danced through the trees. It was moving closer, and with it came a low, haunting whisper that seemed to come from all around us. The symbols from the cabin flashed in my mind, and I knew then that we had disturbed something that should have been left alone. We didn't wait to find out what was coming. We grabbed our gear and fled, running through the forest as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The light followed us, always just out of sight, until we finally reached the safety of our car. We drove away in silence, the fear still gripping us as we left the mountains behind. None of us spoke about the cabin, or the light, or the whispers that haunted us that night. But I know we all felt the same thing, that we had come too close to something otherworldly, something that still lingered in the shadows of the forest. The cabin may not be on any map, but it's out there, waiting for the next group of curious campers to stumble upon it. And when they do, I hope they have the sense to turn back before it's too late. Graveyards are usually places of peace, where the dead rest quietly under the earth. But this old graveyard in Georgia was different. Tucked away in a forgotten corner of the countryside, it had an eerie reputation. The locals whispered about strange happenings, voices in the night, shadows that moved on their own, and a chilling sense of being watched. Of course, that made it the perfect spot for my group of friends and me to visit on one of our late-night adventures. We were always looking for a thrill, and the idea of exploring a cursed graveyard seemed like the ultimate test of bravery. The night we arrived, the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the crumbling tombstones and overgrown graves. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the silence was almost suffocating. We hopped the old iron gate and made our way into the heart of the graveyard, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The graves were ancient, some of them dating back to the early 1800s, their inscriptions worn away by time. But there was something unsettling about the place, something that made my skin crawl. As we wandered among the graves, we started to hear faint whispers, barely audible over the sound of our footsteps. At first, we thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to be coming from all around us, echoing off the tombstones. My friends and I exchanged nervous glances, trying to laugh it off, but the fear was creeping in. The whispers weren't just random noises, they were voices, speaking in low, haunting tones. It was as if the dead were trying to communicate with us, to tell us something we weren't meant to know. Then came the shadows. At first, they were just at the edge of our vision, flitting between the graves like dark, eerie figures. But as we moved deeper into the graveyard, they became more pronounced, more menacing. They moved with purpose, closing in on us as if we were trespassing on sacred ground. Air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over us, heavy and suffocating. It was clear that we were not welcome here. Something dark and malevolent was watching our every move. The climax came when we stumbled upon an old mausoleum, half hidden by ivy and twisted tree roots. The door was ajar, and inside, we could see a staircase leading down into the earth. Curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to explore. As we descended into the darkness, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the walls seemed to close in around us. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, dimly lit chamber, surrounded by old coffins and crumbling stone. That's when we saw it. A figure standing in the shadows, barely visible in the faint light. It was dressed in tattered clothes, its face hidden in the darkness, but we could feel its presence, cold and menacing. The whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with a chilling cacophony. My heart raced as the figure began to move toward us, its footsteps echoing through the chamber. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We turned and fled, racing up the stairs and out of the mausoleum, the whispers following us every step of the way. We didn't stop running until we were back at the car, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. The graveyard loomed behind us, dark and silent, but we could still feel the presence of the cursed spirits that lingered there. We never spoke about what we had seen, but the memory haunted us for weeks. The graveyard was more than just a resting place for the dead. It was a place of dark energy, cursed ground where the spirits were trapped, unable to find peace. To this day, I can still hear those whispers in the back of my mind, chilling reminder of the night we ventured into the cursed graveyard. It's a place I'll never return to, and I hope no one else is foolish enough to disturb the spirits that dwell there. Some places are meant to be left alone, their secrets buried with the dead. Savannah, Georgia, is famous for its historic mansions, dripping with Southern charm and old-world elegance. But one mansion in particular had a reputation that set it apart from the rest. Nestled in the heart of the city, this grand old house had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded up, its gardens overgrown. Locals whispered about the tragic events that had taken place there, the mysterious deaths, the unexplained disappearances. It was said that the spirits of the former residents still roamed the halls, unable to move on. When my partner and I had the opportunity to purchase the mansion at a fraction of its worth, we couldn't resist, despite the warnings. From the moment we stepped inside, the air felt heavy, thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. The house was beautiful, with its grand staircase and ornate ceilings, but there was a darkness that lingered in every corner. At first, we tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the mansion's age and disrepair. But as we began to renovate, strange things started happening. Doors would creak open on their own, and we'd hear faint footsteps echoing through the halls, even when we were alone. It was eerie, but we convinced ourselves it was just the house settling. Then came the voices. At night, we'd hear soft whispers, barely audible, drifting through the mansion. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the air with a chilling sense of unease. The voices were indistinct, but their tone was unmistakable, pleading, sorrowful, as if the spirits were trying to communicate with us. We tried to ignore them, but it became impossible. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until we couldn't sleep, our minds filled with the eerie sound of the mansion's haunting past. The most terrifying experience happened one evening when we were sitting in the parlor discussing our renovation plan. Suddenly, temperature in the room dropped, and the air grew so cold that we could see our breath. The lights flickered, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. We stood frozen as a dark figure appeared in the doorway, a shadowy silhouette, its form barely visible in the dim light. The figure moved slowly into the room, and as it did, the whispers turned into anguished wails. My heart raced as the figure drew closer, its presence heavy with sorrow and anger. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving the room silent and still. But the oppressive feeling lingered, pressing down on us like a weight. We knew then that the mansion was not just haunted, it was cursed. The spirits of the former residents were trapped, bound to the house by the tragic events that had taken place there. No matter what we did, they would never leave. Desperate for answers, we delved into the mansion's history. What we discovered was chilling. The house had once been the home of a wealthy family, but tragedy had struck time and time again. A series of mysterious deaths and disappearances had plagued the family, each more horrifying than the last. Final owner, driven mad by the loss of his loved ones, had taken his own life in the very parlor where we had seen the figure. The spirits of the family were trapped in the mansion, their souls unable to find peace. We knew we couldn't stay. The mansion's dark energy was too powerful, too oppressive. We packed our things and left, abandoning the house to the spirits that still roamed its halls. As we drove away, I glanced back at the mansion, its windows dark and empty, and I could feel the weight of the spirits watching us go. The house had claimed its place in my mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that still lingered there. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that the mansion is waiting for its next owners, for the next unsuspecting souls to be drawn in by its beauty and charm. But I know the truth. The house is more than just a building. It's a place where the past and present collide, where the spirits of the dead still walk among the living. It's a place I will never return to, but it will haunt me for the rest of my life. Savannah, Georgia is famous for its historic mansions, dripping with Southern charm and old-world elegance. But one mansion in particular had a reputation that set it apart from the rest. Nestled in the heart of the city, this grand old house had been abandoned for years. Windows boarded up, gardens overgrown. Locals whispered about the tragic events that had taken place there. The mysterious deaths, unexplained disappearances. It was said that the spirits of the former residents still roamed the halls, unable to move on. When my partner and I had the opportunity to purchase the mansion at a fraction of its worth, we couldn't resist, despite the warnings. From the moment we stepped inside, air felt heavy, thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe. The house was beautiful, with its grand staircase and ornate ceilings, but there was a darkness that lingered in every corner. At first, we tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the mansion's age and disrepair. But as we began to renovate, strange things started happening. Doors would creak open on their own, and we'd hear faint footsteps echoing through the halls, even when we were alone. It was eerie, but we convinced ourselves it was just the house settling. Then came the voices. At night, we'd hear soft whispers, barely audible, drifting through the mansion. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling the air with a chilling sense of unease. The voices were indistinct, but their tone was unmistakable, pleading, sorrowful, as if the spirits were trying to communicate with us. We tried to ignore them, but it became impossible. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until we couldn't sleep, our minds filled with the eerie sound of the mansion's haunting past. The most terrifying experience happened one evening when we were sitting in the parlor, discussing our renovation plan. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped and the air grew so cold that we could see our breath. Lights flickered and the whispers returned, louder than ever. We stood frozen as a dark figure appeared in the doorway, a shadowy silhouette, its form barely visible in the dim light. The figure moved slowly into the room, and as it did, the whispers turned into anguished wails. My heart raced as the figure drew closer, its presence heavy with sorrow and anger. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving the room silent and still. But the oppressive feeling lingered, pressing down on us. But wait. We knew then that the mansion was not just haunted, it was cursed. The spirits of the former residents were trapped, bound to the house by the tragic events that had taken place there. No matter what we did, they would never leave. Desperate for answers, we delved into the mansion's history. What we discovered was chilling. The house had once been the home of a wealthy family, but tragedy had struck time and time again. A series of mysterious deaths and disappearances had plagued the family, each more horrifying than the last. The final owner, driven mad by the loss of his loved ones, had taken his own life in the very parlor where we had seen the figure. The spirits of the family were trapped in the mansion, their souls unable to find peace. We knew we couldn't stay. The mansion's dark energy was too powerful, too oppressive. We packed our things and left, abandoning the house to the spirits that still roamed its halls. As we drove away, I glanced back at the mansion. Windows dark and empty, and I could feel the weight of the spirits watching us go. The house had claimed its place in my mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that still lingered there. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that the mansion is waiting for its next owners. For the next unsuspecting souls, be drawn in by its beauty and charm. But I know the truth. The house is more than just a building. It's a place where the past and present collide, where the spirits of the dead still walk among the living. It's a place I will never return to, but it will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was supposed to be a routine fishing trip in the Gulf of Mexico, just another day at sea. The weather was perfect, the water calm, and my crew and I were looking forward to a peaceful day on the ocean. But as the sun began to set, the atmosphere shifted. Thick fog rolled in out of nowhere, blanketing the water and reducing visibility to almost nothing. We slowed the boat, navigating carefully through the mist, when one of my crew members spotted something in the distance. A dark silhouette emerging from the fog. As we drew closer, the shape became clearer, and we realized it was a ship. But this wasn't just any ship. It was a ghostly vessel, its sails tattered, its hull battered by time. The eerie silence that followed sent chills down my spine. The ship looked ancient, as if it had been lost at sea for centuries. We couldn't see any crew on board, but there was an unsettling feeling that we were being watched. My first mate suggested turning back, but curiosity got the best of us. We decided to approach the ship, hoping to find some clue as to what had happened to it. As we drew nearer, the temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy, with a sense of foreboding. The closer we got, the more we felt like we were crossing into another realm, a place where the living didn't belong. We tied our boat to the phantom ship and climbed aboard. The deck was covered in moss and seaweed, the wood creaking under our weight. The eerie silence persisted, broken only by the occasional creak of the ship's timbers. We searched the deck, but found no signs of life. No crew, no passengers, nothing. It was as if the ship had been abandoned long ago. But as we explored further, we began to hear faint voices, whispers carried on the wind. The voices were chilling, filled with sorrow and despair. They seemed to be coming from below deck. Against our better judgment, we descended into the bowels of the ship. The air grew colder with each step, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. We reached the lower deck, where we found old, rotting crates and barrels, remnants of a long-forgotten cargo. That's when we saw them, ghostly figures, barely visible in the dim light. They moved slowly, as if trapped in an endless loop, performing the tasks they had been doing when the ship met its fate. Their faces were hollow, their eyes filled with a haunting emptiness. My crew and I stood frozen, unable to look away. One of the spirits turned to us, its hollow eyes locking onto mine. It raised a hand, pointing to a door at the far end of the deck. The message was clear. We needed to go through that door. We hesitated, but something compelled us to obey. The door creaked open to reveal a small, dimly lit cabin. Inside, we found a journal, its pages yellowed with age. The entries were written by the ship's captain, detailing their journey across the ocean. The final entries were chilling, describing how the crew had fallen ill, one by one, until only the captain remained. His final words spoke of a curse, a dark force that had claimed the ship and all who sailed on it. As we read the last entry, the temperature in the cabin plummeted, and the door slammed shut behind us. The ghostly whispers grew louder, filling the cabin with a cacophony of voices. We could feel the presence of the spirits all around us, pressing in on us from every side. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. The ship's curse had ensnared us, just as it had the crew centuries ago. Desperate, we tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The walls seemed to close in, and the ghostly figures began to materialize around us, their eyes filled with anger and sorrow. Just when we thought all hope was lost, the ship lurched violently, throwing us off balance. The door burst open, and we scrambled out, racing back to the deck. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the distant lights of a nearby island. We didn't waste any time. We untied our boat and sped away from the phantom ship, the eerie whispers fading into the distance. As we looked back, the ship slowly disappeared into the fog, vanishing as if it had never been there. We made it to shore, shaken but alive. The experience left us haunted, each of us carrying the chilling memory of that ghostly ship. We never spoke of it again, but the encounter changed us. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those ghostly whispers on the wind, a haunting reminder of the phantom ship and the curse that bound it to the sea. It's a memory I can never escape, a ghost story that lives on in the depths of my mind. Louisiana has always been known for its rich history and lingering spirits, but nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced at the old plantation. The sprawling estate was beautiful, its moss-covered trees and grand mansion, but there was an eerie atmosphere that hung over the place like a shroud. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the plantation's dark past, warning visitors not to stay too long. But I was drawn to the history, eager to explore the old house and the grounds. Little did I know, spirits of the past were still very much alive. From the moment I stepped inside the mansion, I felt a chill in the air. The grand entrance hall was filled with antique furniture and portraits of long-dead residents, their eyes seeming to follow me as I moved through the space. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and must. There was something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was a presence, invisible but undeniable, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to ignore it as I began my tour of the house, but the feeling of being watched never left me. As I explored the rooms, I began to hear strange sounds, soft footsteps echoing through the hallways, the faint rustle of fabric, and the occasional whisper, so faint I could barely make it out. At first, I thought it was just the creaking of the old house, but as the sounds grew more frequent, I realized they were something more. The whispers were in a language I didn't understand, but their tone was unmistakably sorrowful. It was as if the walls themselves were mourning the past. I was an unwelcome intruder in their world. The most chilling experience came when I ventured into the basement. The air was damp and cold, and the stairs creaked under my weight. As I descended, the temperature dropped even further, and a sense of dread settled over me. The basement was dimly lit, filled with old crates and dusty relics from a time long gone. But as I moved deeper into the space, I noticed something strange. A set of chains bolted to the wall, rusted and worn with age. My heart sank as I realized what they were. This was where the slaves had been kept, and the air was thick with the weight of their suffering. Suddenly, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and the air seemed to pulse with energy. It was as if the spirits of those who had suffered here were trying to communicate with me, to share their pain. My hands shook as I tried to leave. The door slammed shut on its own, trapping me in the dark, haunted space. The chains rattled, and I could feel the presence of the spirits all around me, their sorrow and anger pressing in on me from every side. Desperate to escape, I stumbled back up the stairs, the whispers and cold breaths following me every step of the way. When I finally reached the main floor, the oppressive feeling lifted, but the memories of the basement clung to me like a shadow. I hurried out of the mansion, eager to put as much distance between myself and the plantation as possible. But as I crossed the threshold, I heard a final whisper, clear and distinct, saying, "Remember us." The haunting experiences at the plantation stayed with me long after I left. I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits were still watching, waiting for someone to acknowledge their pain. I've since learned that the plantation was the site of terrible atrocities, and the spirits of the slaves who suffered there were trapped, unable to find peace. The mansion may be beautiful, but it is also a place of deep sorrow, haunted by the ghosts of the past. Even now, I sometimes hear those whispers in the quiet of the night, a chilling reminder of the spirits that still linger at the old plantation. I've learned to respect the history of such places, to honor the memories of those who came before us. The haunted plantation is a place I will never forget, a somber reminder that the past is never truly gone. It lingers, waiting to be acknowledged. There's something magical about old libraries. The smell of aged paper, quiet that seems to hum with centuries of knowledge. That's what drew me to this ancient library in the heart of New York City. Hidden away from the hustle and bustle of the city, it felt like stepping back in time as soon as I crossed the threshold. The wooden shelves stretched up to the high ceilings, filled with dusty tomes that hadn't been touched in years. But as I wandered through the aisles, I couldn't shake the feeling that this library held more than just books. There was an eerie stillness in the air, as if the place was alive, watching me. It wasn't long before I started to notice strange things happening. Books that I was certain I'd put back on the shelves would end up on the table again, open to random pages filled with cryptic messages. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then it began happening more frequently. The messages in the books were chilling, warnings, prophecies, and eerie descriptions of events that seemed too coincidental to be ignored. The more I read, the more I felt like the library was trying to tell me something, to guide me toward a truth that was hidden within its walls. One afternoon, as I was exploring a particularly dusty section of the library, I stumbled upon a book that looked out of place. It was bound in dark leather with no title on the spine. Curiosity got the best of me, and I pulled it from the shelf. As soon as I opened it, a cold breeze swept through the aisle, rustling the pages of the other books around me. The book's pages were filled with symbols and diagrams, all written in a language I couldn't understand. But there was something haunting about the images. Twisted figures, eerie landscapes, eyes that seemed to follow me as I turned the pages. The more I studied the book, the more I felt a connection to it, as if it was revealing secrets meant only for me. But with that connection came a sense of unease. The symbols began to blur, and the words seemed to shift and change as I read them. That night, I had strange dreams, visions of the library, but it was different. The walls were darker, the shelves twisted and gnarled, and the books seemed to pulse with a life of their own. In my dream, I was trapped in the library, unable to find my way out as the shelves closed in around me. When I woke, I was determined to understand the book's secret. I returned to the library, but when I reached the aisle where I had found the book, it was gone. The entire section seemed different, as if it had shifted overnight. I searched for hours. There was no sign of the book. It was as if the library had hidden it from me, teasing me with its mysteries, and then taking them away. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to speak with the librarian, hoping they might have some answers. The librarian was an older woman, with a knowing smile and eyes that seemed to see right through me. When I described the book to her, she nodded slowly. "Ah, you found one of the enchanted books," she said in a quiet, almost reverent. She explained that the library was no ordinary place. It was alive, filled with books that held ancient knowledge and dark secrets. The enchanted books, she said, were dangerous. They could reveal truths, but they could also trap those who sought them out. Many had tried to unlock their mysteries. Few had succeeded without losing themselves in the process. Despite her warnings, I couldn't let it go. I returned to the library day after day, searching for the book, hoping to find some clue that would lead me back to it. The library seemed to change with each visit, as if it was testing me, challenging me to prove my worth. I'd find new passages that hadn't been there before, a stack filled with books that seemed to whisper as I walked by. The more I explored, the more I felt the library's presence, guiding me deeper into its labyrinthine aisles. Finally, after weeks of searching, I found the book again. It was tucked away in a hidden alcove, its dark leather cover just as I remembered. But this time I hesitated. The librarian's words echoed in my mind. Was I ready to face the secrets it held? Taking a deep breath, I opened the book once more. The pages were different this time, the symbols clearer, the images sharper. As I read, I felt the library around me shift, the walls closing in, the air growing colder. But I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. In the end, the book revealed its final secret, a chilling message that shook me to my core. The library was not just a repository of knowledge. It was a doorway, a portal to another realm. And by reading the book, I had opened that doorway. The walls began to pulse with energy, and the shadows grew darker, more tangible. I knew then that I had gone too far, that the library's secrets were not meant for me. I barely made it out, the echoes of the library's whispers following me as I fled. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the library is still watching me, waiting for me to return. The book's secrets haunt my dreams, and I know that if I ever go back, the library will not let me leave again. It's a place of ancient power, a haunting reminder that some knowledge is best left untouched. There's something about old asylums that sends a chill down your spine, and this one in Virginia was no exception. It had been abandoned for decades, left to decay on the outskirts of town. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, telling stories of the horrors that had taken place within its walls. Naturally, that made it the perfect place for us to investigate. As ghost hunters, we'd been to plenty of eerie locations, but this asylum felt different, darker, more oppressive. The moment we stepped through the gates, we knew we were in for something chilling. The building loomed before us, its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti. As we approached the entrance, the air grew colder, and a thick fog seemed to rise from the ground, enveloping us. The heavy doors creaked open with a groan, and we stepped inside. The interior was just as unsettling as the exterior. Long, dark hallways lined with rusting gurneys and peeling paint. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. But there was something else, too. A low, eerie hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls, like the building itself was alive. We split up to cover more ground, each of us equipped with cameras and recording devices. The further we ventured into the asylum, the more the atmosphere seemed to change. Shadows flickered at the edge of our vision, and strange noises echoed through the empty halls. I could feel the weight of the building's history pressing down on me. Fear, the pain, the suffering of the patients who had been trapped here. It was as if their spirits were still lingering, unable to find peace. As I explored one of the old patient wards, I heard a faint whisper behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of my teammates, but the hallway was empty. The whisper came again, clearer this time. My name, spoken softly, as if from a distance. My heart raced as I scanned the room, but there was no one there. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, taking on eerie shapes that defied explanation. Things took a darker turn when we reached the basement. The air was damp and musty, and the walls were lined with old pipes and rusting metal doors. This was where the most disturbing events had taken place. Experimental treatments, electroshock therapy, and worse. As we descended, the temperature dropped even further, and a thick sense of dread settled over us. The lights on our cameras flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. That's when we saw them, ghostly figures, barely visible in the dim light, standing at the far end of the corridor. The figures moved slowly, their forms distorted and twisted. They seemed to be reliving their final moments, trapped in an endless loop of suffering. We stood frozen, watching in horror as the spirits replayed their torment. One of the figures, a woman with hollow eyes and a twisted smile, turned toward us. Her gaze locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. She whispered something, her voice barely audible, but the words sent a shiver down my spine. "Help us." Panic set in as the ghostly figures began to move closer. We tried to retreat, but the heavy door at the top of the stairs slammed shut on its own, trapping us in the basement. Spirits closed in, their whispers growing louder, more desperate. My breath caught in my throat as I realized we were surrounded. The air was thick with the weight of their pain, and I could feel their presence pressing in on me, suffocating me. It was as if the asylum itself was alive, feeding on our fear. Desperate to escape, we fumbled with our equipment, trying to record the voices, the apparitions, anything that might prove what we were experiencing. But the cameras flickered and died, batteries drained by the oppressive energy. It was then that one of us noticed an old, faded door at the end of the hallway, half hidden behind a rusting metal cabinet. We made a break for it, hoping it would lead us to safety. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage that led back to the surface. We didn't hesitate. We ran, the ghostly whispers fading behind us as we escaped the asylum's grasp. When we finally reached the safety of the outside world, we were shaken but alive. The asylum loomed behind us, dark and silent, a chilling reminder of the spirits trapped within. We never spoke of what happened in that basement. The memory of it still haunts me. Faces of those tortured souls, their desperate pleas for help, are burned into my mind. The asylum is a place of deep sorrow, a haunting reminder of the horrors that can never be forgotten. Exploring shipwrecks had always been a passion of mine. There was something thrilling about diving into the depths of the ocean, discovering the remnants of history lost to time. So when the opportunity arose to explore a shipwreck off the coast of Florida, couldn't resist. Ship had been lying at the bottom of the sea for over a century, its tragic sinking shrouded in mystery. The weather was perfect, and the water was clear. But as we prepared for the dive, an eerie feeling settled over me. I couldn't shake the sense that we were about to uncover something chilling. As we descended into the depth, the sunlight faded, and the shipwreck came into view. The once grand vessel lay in ruins on the ocean floor, its hull encrusted with coral and barnacles. Fish darted in and out of the broken windows, and the ocean currents whispered through the decaying timbers. It was a haunting sight, beautiful and eerie all at once. But as we swam closer, I noticed something strange. The water around the ship grew colder, and the light seemed to dim, as if the wreck was casting a shadow over the sea. We began our exploration, swimming through the ship's twisted remains. The interior was filled with debris, broken furniture, rusting machinery, and the remnants of a once bustling crew. There was something else, too. An oppressive presence that seemed to cling to the ship like a dark cloud. The deeper we went, the more unsettling it became. I started to hear faint sounds, barely audible over the sound of my breathing. At first, I thought it was just the creaking of the ship, but then I realized it was something more. Whispers, carried on the currents, as if the ship itself was speaking to us. The whispers grew louder as we reached the lower decks. The water here was colder still, and the darkness pressed in from all sides. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing the ghostly outlines of long-forgotten cabins and storage room. That's when I saw them, shadows moving in the darkness, shapes that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was just the fish, but as I looked closer, I realized the shadows were human figures, their forms barely visible in the murky water. They drifted through the wreck, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were still going about their duties. My dive partner must have sensed something was wrong because he grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my trance. We signaled to each other to surface, but as we turned to leave, the ghostly figures began to multiply. They surrounded us, their hollow eyes watching our every move. The whispers grew louder, filled with sorrow and despair. I could feel their pain, their longing to be free from the ship's curse. We swam as fast as we could, desperate to escape the haunting presence that clung to us like a second skin. When we finally broke the surface, gasping for air, the oppressive feeling lifted, but the memory of those ghostly figures remained. We pulled ourselves onto the boat, shaken by what we had experienced. The shipwreck loomed below us, dark and silent, graveyard of lost souls. We decided to cut the dive short, unable to shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that was meant to be left alone. As we sailed back to shore, I couldn't help but glance back at the water, half expecting to see those ghostly figures rising from the depths. The experience haunted me for days. Couldn't stop thinking about the whispers, the shadows, cold, empty eyes of the spirits trapped in that sunken ship. I had always believed the sea held its own mysteries, but this was something different, something darker. The shipwreck was more than just a relic of the past. It was a tomb, a place where the souls of the lost still lingered, bound to the ocean by a curse that could never be broken. Even now, whenever I'm near the water, I can still hear the faint whispers of the sea, chilling reminder of the spirits that dwell in the deep. The haunted shipwreck is a place I will never forget, a haunting echo of the past that will stay with me forever. As an antique dealer in Massachusetts, I have come across my fair share of strange and eerie objects, but nothing quite like the jewelry collection that arrived at my shop one rainy afternoon. It was an estate sale find, brought in by a woman who seemed eager to get rid of it. The pieces were beautiful, intricately designed with gemstones that sparkled in the dim light of my shop. But there was something off about them. The moment I touched the jewelry, a chill ran down my spine, and I could feel a dark energy radiating from each piece. I should have trusted my instincts, but the allure of such rare items was too strong to resist. I put the jewelry on display, hoping to attract the attention of collectors, but it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. First incident was minor. A necklace that I had carefully placed on a velvet cushion was found lying on the floor the next morning. I brushed it off as an accident, but then it happened again. And again. Each time the jewelry seemed to move on its own, as if it was trying to escape. The air in the shop grew colder, and an eerie silence seemed to settle over the place, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then came the nightmares. Every night, I dreamed of the jewelry, haunting visions of the previous owners, their faces twisted in fear and pain. In the dreams, they wore the cursed pieces, their eyes pleading for help as the jewelry tightened around their necks, wrists, and fingers. I would wake up drenched in sweat, the images burned into my mind. The dreams grew more vivid with each passing night, until I could barely sleep, terrified of what I might see next. Things escalated when customers began to report strange experiences after purchasing the jewelry. One woman returned a bracelet, claiming it had brought her nothing but bad luck since she bought it. Another man said he had seen ghostly figures in his home after buying a necklace. The final straw came when a young woman rushed into my shop, pale and trembling, demanding that I take back a ring she had purchased. She swore that the ring had caused her to see terrifying visions of a dark figure watching her, always just out of sight. I couldn't deny it any longer. Jewelry was cursed. Determined to rid myself of the cursed pieces, I tried to sell them at a deep discount, but no one would take them. The jewelry seemed to repel potential buyers, as if it didn't want to leave my possession. Desperate, I decided to consult with an expert in the occult. She examined the jewelry and confirmed my worst fears. Pieces were cursed, imbued with dark energy that had been passed down through generations. The jewelry had been owned by a powerful family, and each piece had witnessed terrible events, murder, betrayal, and tragedy. The spirits of those who had suffered were now bound to the jewelry, and anyone who possessed it would be haunted. Their pain. The only way to break the curse, she said, was to destroy the jewelry. But as soon as she spoke the words, the air in the room grew thick with tension, and a chilling wind swept through the shop, rattling the windows. Jewelry seemed to resist, the gemstones glowing with an eerie light. It was as if the spirits within were fighting to protect the cursed pieces, unwilling to be released from their torment. I hesitated, unsure if I had the strength to go through with it. In the end, I knew I had no choice. Armed with a hammer, I prepared to destroy the jewelry. Cursed pieces seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing colder with each swing. But as I brought the hammer down on the first piece, a delicate necklace with a blood-red ruby, the room filled with a chilling scream, so loud and eerie that I dropped the hammer in fear. The scream echoed through the shop, fading slowly until there was nothing but silence. The necklace lay shattered on the floor, the ruby cracked in half. I could feel the dark energy lifting. Earth finally broken. One by one, I destroyed the remaining pieces, each time hearing the faint echo of a scream, as if the spirits were being released from their prison. When it was over, the shop felt lighter, the oppressive atmosphere gone. But the experience left me haunted. I couldn't shake the memory of those cursed pieces, the dark energy that had clung to them like a shadow. I've since learned to be more careful with what I bring into my shop. Some treasures are better left buried, their secrets hidden from the world. I've always loved finding unique antiques, and when I came across that antique mirror at a small shop in California, I knew I had to have it. The frame was beautifully carved, with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story of their own. The glass had a slight distortion, giving it a haunting, almost ethereal quality. The shopkeeper seemed hesitant to sell it though, warning me that the mirror had a strange history. But I brushed off his concerns, eager to add it to my collection. Little did I know, that mirror would soon become the source of my darkest fears. From the moment I brought it home, the atmosphere in my apartment seemed to change. The air grew colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but soon, the strange occurrences began. I would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror, shadows that didn't match my own reflection. At night, I would hear faint whispers coming from the direction of the mirror, though there was no one else in the room. It was eerie, but I tried to convince myself it was just the quirks of an old piece of furniture. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something that sent chills down my spine. The reflection in the mirror was different, slightly off. It wasn't just me looking back. There was someone else standing in the background, barely visible. A shadowy figure, watching me with hollow eyes. I spun around, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone, leaving me with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. From that moment on, the mirror became the center of my nightmares. The visions grew more vivid with each passing day. I would see scenes in the mirror that didn't belong, dark, haunting images of places I'd never been and people I'd never met. The most chilling part was that these visions felt real, as if the mirror was showing me glimpses of the past, perhaps the future. The line between reality and reflection began to blur, and I found myself drawn to the mirror, unable to look away, even though I knew it was dangerous. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with thoughts that weren't my own. One night, the mirror showed me something that changed everything. I was standing in my apartment, just as I had been moments before, but the reflection was different. The walls were cracked and crumbling, and the furniture was covered in dust. And there, in the corner of the room, was the shadowy figure again, more distinct this time. It was a woman, her face twisted in anguish, her eyes pleading for help. She reached out to me, her hand pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. I stumbled back, terrified, but the vision wouldn't disappear. The woman's mouth moved silently, but I could hear her words in my mind. Find me. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the mirror's history. What I discovered was chilling. The mirror had once belonged to a woman who had lived in the house where the antique shop now stood. She had been trapped in an abusive marriage, and one night, in a fit of despair, she had taken her own life in front of the mirror. It was said that her spirit had become trapped in the glass, unable to find peace. The mirror had been passed down through generations, leaving a trail of haunting experiences in its wake. With this knowledge, I knew I had to free the spirit trapped in the mirror. How? The shopkeeper's warnings echoed in my mind. Was there a way to break the curse without unleashing something worse? I decided to try a ritual I had read about, one that was meant to release trapped spirits. I lit candles around the mirror, said the incantation, and waited. The room grew cold, and the mirror's surface seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. The shadowy figure appeared one last time, her eyes filled with sorrow and relief. And then, with a final whisper, she was gone. The mirror now hangs on my wall, surface still and quiet. The strange occurrences have stopped and the oppressive atmosphere has lifted. But the experience left me haunted. A reminder that some objects carry more than just history. They carry the weight of souls lost to time. The enchanted mirror is a beautiful piece, but I can never forget the chilling visions it showed me, or the spirit it held within. It's a reminder to be careful with what we invite into our lives, for some things are not as they seem. You know that feeling when curiosity gets the best of you? That's how it all started for me and a few friends when we decided to explore an old, abandoned factory in Detroit. The place had been closed for decades, and the locals whispered chilling tales about it, but that only made us more eager. We arrived just before sunset, sky painted in eerie shades of orange and purple. As soon as we stepped inside, the air changed. It was heavy, thick with the scent, rust, and decay. It didn't take long before we started hearing strange noises, almost like whispers echoing through the empty halls. At first, we brushed it off as wind. Deep down, we knew something wasn't right. As we ventured deeper, eerie feeling grew stronger. The factory was a maze of rusted machinery, broken windows, and peeling walls. Shadows seemed to move on their own, playing tricks on our minds. That's when we heard it, a faint clanging like metal on metal. We froze, listening intently. The sound grew louder, closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized it was coming from the floor above us. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to decide whether to investigate or hightail it out of there. But, of course, curiosity won again. Climbing the creaky stairs was like walking into a nightmare. Every step echoed through the factory, mixing with the chilling sounds that now surrounded us. When we reached the top, we found ourselves in a massive room filled with old conveyor belts and machinery. That's when we saw them. Ghostly figures, barely visible but unmistakable. They were workers, their faces twisted in pain and fear. It was like a scene frozen in time, replaying their final moments. We stood there, paralyzed as the figures moved around us, reenacting the tragic accident that had claimed their lives. The air grew colder, and a haunting whisper filled the room. "Get out," it said, clear as day. My skin prickled with fear, and for the first time, we all felt the same instinct. Run. We bolted down the stairs, the factory seeming to come alive with every step we took. Machinery that hadn't worked in decades began to groan and creak, as if fueled by some dark energy. We could hear footsteps behind us, but when we turned around, no one was there. Panic set in, and the only thing on our minds was escaping this eerie place. As we reached the exit, the heavy metal doors slammed shut on their own. We were trapped. My hands shook as I tried to pry them open, but it was no use. Factory had us, and it wasn't letting go. We heard the ghostly whispers again, this time more urgent. "Leave, now," they demanded. How? The doors were sealed tight. That's when one of my friends spotted a small window, just big enough for us to squeeze through. We didn't hesitate. One by one, we climbed out, hearts racing, hands trembling. Once we were outside, the air felt different, lighter, safer. But the factory loomed behind us, its windows dark and menacing. We swore never to speak of what happened inside, but those chilling memories still haunt me. Sometimes, late at night, I hear those whispers again, reminding me of the spirits trapped in that abandoned place. And I wonder, did we really escape, or did a part of us stay behind with them? The thought sends shivers down my spine every time. It wasn't just a factory. It was a graveyard of forgotten souls. The eerie silence of the place still echoes in my mind, haunting me in ways I never imagined. I don't think I'll ever forget those ghostly figures, their pain etched into my memory. And though I've tried to put it behind me, I can't help but feel a pull to go back, face whatever darkness lingers there. But deep down, I know some doors are better left unopened. Moving into that old lighthouse on the coast of Maine seemed like a dream come true. Partner and I had always wanted to escape the city and find a quiet place by the sea. The lighthouse was perfect, remote, serene, and with breathtaking views. But from the moment we stepped inside, something then felt off. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and there was a strange, haunting silence that clung to every corner. The locals had warned us about the place, mentioning strange lights and ghostly figures, but we dismissed it as superstitious nonsense. How wrong we were. Our first night there, we noticed it. The light from the top of the lighthouse was flickering on and off, even though we hadn't touched the controls. It was eerie, but we tried to ignore it, chalking it up to old wiring. Then, in the dead of night, we heard it, footsteps echoing through the halls. First, we thought it might be the wind, but these steps were deliberate, heavy. They seemed to be coming closer, moving up the stairs toward our bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest as we listened, too terrified to move. The next morning, we searched the lighthouse from top to bottom, but there was no sign of anyone else. Still, the unsettling feeling remained. That evening, as we sat by the fire, I noticed a strange glow outside, like someone was standing at the edge of the cliffs. I rushed to the window, but there was no one there. Just the eerie light of the full moon reflecting off the waves. But I could feel it. Someone, or something, was watching us. As the days went by, the strange occurrences became more frequent. Doors would open and close on their own, and we'd hear disembodied voices whispering our names. The most chilling part was the lights. They would flicker and pulse, as if trying to send us a message. We began to dig into the history of the lighthouse, hoping to find some explanation. What we uncovered was haunting. Previous lighthouse keepers had all met tragic ends: drowning, disappearances, even suicide. It was as if the lighthouse itself was cursed. One night, we were awakened by a loud crash. Rushing to the source of the noise, we found that the old lantern room had been completely trashed. Glass shattered, and the once pristine lens was cracked. There was no sign of how it had happened. That's when we saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, shrouded in mist. It was the ghostly figure of a man, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He raised his hand, pointing toward the sea, and then vanished into thin air. Terrified, we decided to leave the lighthouse. But as we packed our things, the lights began to flicker violently, and the air grew colder. The ghostly whispers surrounded us, urging us to stay. It was as if the lighthouse didn't want to let us go. We ran to the car. The engine wouldn't start. We were trapped. The haunting presence was stronger than ever, and we knew we had to find a way to break the curse. Desperate, we returned to the lighthouse and searched for any clue that might help us. In the attic, we found an old journal, hidden beneath the floorboards. It belonged to one of the previous keepers, and it detailed the horrifying events that had led to his demise. He had tried to leave the lighthouse. The spirits wouldn't allow it. The only way to escape was to make peace with them, understand their pain. We followed the journal's instructions, lighting a candle in the lantern room and reciting a prayer for the lost souls. The air grew still, and for a moment it felt like the spirits were listening. Then the flickering stopped, and the oppressive feeling lifted. We felt a sense of peace, as if the spirits had finally found rest. The next morning we packed our bags and left the lighthouse for good. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw the light shining steadily, as if the spirits were finally at peace. The haunting memories of that place will always stay with me, but I'm grateful we made it out. The lighthouse still stands, a chilling reminder of the ghosts that once roamed its halls. And though we escaped, I'll never forget the eerie feeling of being watched. The haunting presence that lingered in every shadow. Some places, I've learned, are better left alone. When I first laid eyes on the painting, I was captivated. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A haunting portrait of a woman with dark, sorrowful eyes, set against a backdrop of eerie shadows. I found it in a small, tucked-away gallery in New York City, and something about it called to me. Despite the chill it sent down my spine, I couldn't resist buying it. The gallery owner gave me a strange look as he wrapped it up, muttering something about a curse, but I shrugged it off. How could a painting be cursed? As soon as I hung it in my apartment, things started to change. At first, it was subtle, a shadow that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, feeling of being watched. Soon, the changes became more pronounced. The woman in the painting, her expression was different. Her eyes, once filled with sadness, now seemed to follow me wherever I went, as if she was trying to communicate something. It was unsettling, to say the least, but I tried to ignore it. Then came the dreams. Every night, I'd find myself in a dark, eerie landscape, with the woman from the painting standing in the distance. She never spoke. Her presence was chilling. The dreams were vivid, haunting, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, unable to shake the feeling of dread. I started to avoid looking at the painting, but no matter where I went in my apartment, I could feel her eyes on me. One night, I woke up to the sound of soft, whispering voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but as I listened closer, I realized the whispers were coming from the painting. The woman's lips seemed to move, her eyes filled with desperation. I could make out a few words. "Help me," she seemed to say. My heart raced as I realized that the curse was real, and the painting was trying to communicate with me. But what did she want? I became obsessed with the painting, spending hours staring at it, trying to decipher its secret. I researched its origins, hoping to find some clue to its dark past. What I discovered was chilling. The artist, a recluse from the 19th century, had painted the portrait of his wife, who had tragically died shortly after its completion. Rumor had it that her spirit became trapped in the painting, cursed to haunt anyone who possessed it. Determined to break the curse, I sought out experts in the occult. They all told me the same thing. The only way to free the spirit was to destroy the painting. The thought of doing so terrified me. What if destroying it unleashed something even worse? The painting had become a part of me, and the thought of losing it, even with all the eerie occurrences, was unbearable. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers had grown louder, and the woman's eyes now brimmed with anger. I grabbed a knife and stood before the painting, trembling. As I raised the blade, the room grew icy cold, and a chilling wind swept through the apartment. Painting seemed to come alive, woman's face contorted in terror. "Please, don't," a voice echoed in my mind, but I knew I had no choice. With one swift motion, I slashed the canvas. Painting let out a blood-curdling scream, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged, swirling around the room. I fell to the floor, paralyzed with fear. The shadow hovered over me for a moment before dissipating into the air. The room fell silent, and when I looked up, painting was destroyed. Nothing but torn canvas and splintered wood. The curse was lifted, but the experience left me haunted. Even now, I can still hear the whispers in the dead of night, and I sometimes catch glimpses of the woman's face in the shadows. The painting may be gone, but the memory of it remains, a chilling reminder of the darkness that once consumed me. I've learned to be careful with what I bring into my home. Some objects carry more than just history. They carry the weight of spirits long forgotten. It all began with a night train from Chicago to New Orleans. I had taken this route many times before, but something felt different that evening. The air in the station was thick with tension, and an eerie silence hung over the platform. As the train pulled in, I noticed it looked older than usual, like a relic from another era. Drugging it off, I boarded, finding my seat in an almost empty carriage. Few passengers who were there seemed distant. lost in their own worlds. I settled in, hoping for a quiet journey, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the train rumbled through the night, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I could hear whispers, faint and chilling, as if they were coming from the very walls of the train. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be calling out names I didn't recognize, but that sent shivers down my spine. Then, out of nowhere, the temperature dropped. The carriage became freezing cold, my breath visible in the air. I pulled my coat tighter around me, but it did little to ward off the chill. That's when I saw it. A ghostly figure at the end of the aisle. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his face pale and gaunt. He stared straight at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. Before I could react, he vanished, leaving behind an eerie silence that made my heart race. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The other passengers began to stir, their faces pale with fear. One woman clutched her rosary, whispering prayers under her breath. A man in a suit glanced around nervously, his hands shaking. We were all on edge, and no one dared to speak of what we had just seen. It was as if acknowledging it would make it all too real. But deep down, we all knew we were not alone on that train. As the night wore on, the ghostly encounters became more frequent. I saw glimpses of other spirits, an old woman sitting by the window, a young boy running down the aisle. They appeared and disappeared without a trace, their presence haunting and chilling. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, as if the spirits were trying to tell us something. I could feel their pain, their longing, but I couldn't understand their message. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up from my seat and made my way to the conductor's cabin, hoping for some answers. But when I arrived, the cabin was empty. The train was moving, but there was no one at the controls. Panic set in as I realized we were on a ghost train. No conductor, no crew, just us passengers and the spirits that haunted the carriages. I hurried back to my seat, my mind racing with fear. That's when I saw him again, the ghostly man from earlier. This time, he spoke. "You must stop the train," he whispered, his voice filled with urgency. "If you don't, we'll all be lost." I didn't know what to do. How could I stop a train with no conductor, no crew? But the man's words echoed in my mind, and I knew I had to try. Desperate, I searched the carriage for any way to stop the train. I found an emergency brake near the door and, without thinking, pulled it with all my strength. The train screeched to a halt, the sound deafening in the stillness of the night. For a moment, everything was silent, and I wondered if I had made a mistake. But then the air shifted. The spirits began to fade, their whispers growing quieter until they disappeared altogether. The temperature returned to normal, and the eerie feeling lifted. When the train finally arrived in New Orleans, I stepped off, shaken but relieved. The other passengers hurried away without a word, eager to put the chilling experience behind them. But as I walked through the station, I couldn't help but glance back at the train. It sat there, silent and still, phantom relic of a tragic past. It never took that route again, and whenever I hear the sound of a train whistle in the distance, I can't help but wonder, are the spirits still riding the rails, searching for someone to help them find peace? We were on a road trip through Arizona when we stumbled upon it, a ghost town that wasn't marked on any map. The desert sun beat down on us as we drove along a dusty road, and out of nowhere, we saw it. Town seemed frozen in time, a collection of weathered buildings and empty streets, untouched by the modern world. Curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to explore. As soon as we stepped out of the car, an eerie silence greeted us, the kind that makes your skin prickle. Town was deserted, but it felt like we weren't alone. First thing we noticed was the absence of any signs of life. No birds, no insects, not even a breeze. It was as if the town had been sealed off from the world. We wandered through the streets, passing by old saloons, a church, and a crumbling general store. Each step echoed in the silence, amplifying the eerie atmosphere. That's when we heard it. Faint sound, like distant whispers carried on the wind. We stopped in our tracks, listening intently. The whispers grew louder, but we couldn't make out the words. It was as if the town itself was trying to communicate with us. As we continued exploring, strange things began to happen. We'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of our eyes. When we turned to look, there was nothing there. Shadows seemed to shift on their own, creating shapes that defied explanation. The whispers followed us wherever we went, growing more urgent with each passing moment. It was clear that this town held secrets that were not meant to be uncovered. We reached the old church at the edge of town, its doors hanging open as if inviting us inside. Against our better judgment, we entered. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of decay. Rows of empty pews stretched out before us, and at the front, a dusty altar stood as a reminder of a time long past. That's when we saw them. Ghostly figures seated in the pews, their faces obscured by shadows. They were silent, unmoving, but their presence was unmistakable. A chill ran down my spine as I realized we were not alone. Panic set in, and we turned to leave, but the doors slammed shut on their own. We were trapped. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with an eerie chant. The ghostly figures began to rise from their seats, slowly making their way toward us. My heart raced as we frantically searched for a way out. That's when one of us noticed a small door at the back of the church, half hidden behind a curtain. We made a break for it, hoping it would lead us to safety. The door led to a narrow staircase that spiraled down into darkness. We had no choice but to descend, the ghostly figures still following us. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers turned into chilling wails, echoed through the stairwell. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, underground chamber. It was filled with old relics, rusty tools, tattered clothing, and faded photographs of the town's former resident. But there was something else. An ancient, dusty book lying on a stone pedestal in the center of the room. Desperate for answers, we opened the book. Its pages were filled with strange symbols and cryptic messages, but one passage stood out. It spoke of the town's dark past. How the residents had vanished mysteriously one night, leaving no trace behind. The town had become a place of lost souls, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to free them. And now we were caught in their web. Realizing that the book held the key to breaking the curse, we followed its instructions, reciting an incantation that was meant to release the spirit. The air grew thick with energy, and the room began to shake. The ghostly figures appeared around us, their faces now visible, haunting and full of sorrow. But as we completed the incantation, they slowly began to fade, their forms dissolving into the air. The whispers ceased, and the oppressive feeling lifted. When we emerged from the church, the town was bathed in an eerie twilight, but it no longer felt menacing. Spirits had found peace, and the town seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. We left without looking back, grateful to have escaped. But the memory of that ghost town still haunts me. Empty streets, whispers in the wind, and the chilling presence of those lost souls. It's a place I'll never forget. A reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The Black Hills of South Dakota had always held a mysterious allure for me. So when a group of friends suggested we hike through the untouched wilderness, I jumped at the chance. We set off early in the morning, the sun casting long shadows through the dense trees. The forest was beautiful, serene even, but there was an eerie quality to it, something that felt ancient and almost otherworldly. As we ventured deeper, the usual sounds of nature faded, replaced by a haunting silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was as if the forest was watching us, waiting for something. As we hiked, we began to notice strange carvings on the trees, symbols that none of us recognized. They were intricate, almost hypnotic, and seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. One of my friends, a bit of a skeptic, dismissed them as nothing more than old markings left by Native American tribes. But I wasn't so sure. There was something chilling about those symbols, something that made me feel like we were trespassing on sacred ground. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around us, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. It wasn't long before we started to experience strange occurrences. We'd hear faint whispers carried on the wind, When we stopped to listen, forest would fall silent again. Shadows flitted between the trees, always just out of sight, and a sense of unease settled over our group. It was as if the forest itself was alive, filled with spirits that didn't want us there. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to shake off the feeling of dread, but it clung to me like a heavy fog. Then we stumbled upon it, clearing in the middle of the forest, bathed in an eerie light. In the center stood a massive tree, its gnarled roots twisting out of the ground like ancient serpents. There was something off about this place, something haunting. The air was thick with a strange energy, and the silence was deafening. That's when we saw them, ghostly figures emerging from the shadows. They were Native American spirits, their faces solemn, their eyes filled with sorrow. They seemed to be watching us, waiting for something. Panic set in as the spirits began to move closer. We tried to leave the clearing, but no matter which direction we went, we always ended up back at the tree. It was as if the forest was playing tricks on us, trapping us in this haunting place. The spirits surrounded us, their presence chilling and eerie. One of them, a tall figure with piercing eyes, stepped forward and spoke in a language none of us understood, but we didn't need to know the words to understand the message. We were not welcome here. Desperate to escape, we huddled together, trying to figure out what to do. That's when one of my friends remembered the carvings on the trees. Maybe they were a warning, or maybe they held the key to getting out of this place. We retraced our steps, following the symbols back through the forest, the spirits always close behind. The air grew colder with every step, and the forest seemed to shift around us, making it difficult to find our way. Finally, after what felt like hours, we found ourselves back at the edge of the forest. The spirits had vanished, and the oppressive feeling lifted. We hurried back to our car, eager to put as much distance between us and that enchanted forest as possible. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just escaped something ancient and powerful, something that still lingered in the shadows of the Black Hills. Even now, I can still hear the whispers in the wind, and I sometimes see those symbols in my dreams. The forest may have let us go, but its haunting presence remains with me. It's a place of beauty and terror, a reminder that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. I haven't returned to the Black Hills since that day, and I don't plan to. Some places I've learned are meant to be left in peace. The old hotel in Colorado seemed like the perfect getaway. Nestled high in the Rockies, it offered stunning views and a sense of isolation that we were craving. From the moment we arrived, something felt off. The air was thick with silence, an eerie, almost unnatural quiet that pressed down on us. The staff was polite but distant, and the few other guests we saw avoided eye contact, as if they were hiding something. As we settled into our room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The walls seemed to hum with a chilling energy, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once. That first night, I woke to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. I lay there, listening as they grew louder, closer. My heart pounded in my chest as the footsteps stopped right outside our door. Holding my breath, I waited for the knock, but it never came. Instead, footsteps slowly retreated, disappearing into the eerie silence of the hotel. I glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. It was unsettling, but I convinced myself it was just another guest. The next morning, though, when I mentioned it to the receptionist, she gave me a strange look and quickly changed the subject. As the days went on, the strange occurrences escalated. The lights would flicker at odd times, and we'd hear faint voices coming from the empty hallways. Once, I saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the corridor, but when I blinked, it was gone. My partner and I both started having the same haunting dreams of a massacre that had taken place in the hotel years ago. In the dreams, we were not just observers. We were participants, trapped in the chaos and terror of that night. Each morning, we woke up drenched in sweat, the eerie images lingering in our minds. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace in the lounge, we overheard an older couple whispering about the hotel's dark history. They spoke of a massacre that had occurred decades ago. Guests brutally murdered in their rooms by a deranged man who had once worked at the hotel. The staff had covered it up, and the hotel had changed hands several times since. But the spirits of the victims were said to still haunt the place. The couple left soon after, and we were left with a sinking feeling that our dreams were more than just nightmares. That night, the hotel felt different, more oppressive, more alive. The silence was no longer comforting. It was suffocating. As we tried to sleep, the faint sound of whispering filled the room, growing louder and more insistent. Temperature dropped, and the lights flickered wildly. Then, without warning, the door to our room slammed shut on its own. We bolted upright, hearts racing, as a cold wind swept through the room. The whispers turned into low, chilling moans, and I could feel a presence in the room. Something dark, something angry. Terrified, we grabbed our things and tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. We were trapped. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the room seemed to come alive, swirling around us. That's when we saw them, ghostly figures emerging from the walls, their faces twisted in pain and fear. It moved closer, their eyes filled with sorrow and anger, as if begging for help. My partner screamed, and I frantically searched for a way out. Desperate, I grabbed a chair and smashed the window. The glass shattered, and we climbed out, escaping into the freezing night. We didn't stop running until we reached our car. As we drove away, I glanced back at the hotel, its dark silhouette looming against the mountain. The lights in the windows flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw the ghostly figures watching us leave. We didn't speak the entire drive home, too shaken to put the experience into words. Even now, the memory of that silent hotel haunts me. The massacre that took place there left scars that can never heal, and the spirits of those who died are still trapped, their voices lost in the eerie silence. I've learned to trust my instincts. Some places are not meant to be visited, no matter how beautiful they seem. The hotel still stands, chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks within. And though I'll never go back, the eerie silence of that place will stay with me forever. Haunting echo that I can never escape. It was one of those rainy afternoons in Oregon when you feel like getting lost in a good book. I was wandering through a secondhand bookstore when I found it, an old, dusty manuscript tucked away on a forgotten shelf. The cover was worn, pages yellowed with age, but something about it drew me in. The title was faded, barely legible. I could make out enough to know it was a story. The owner of the shop seemed eager to get rid of it, practically giving it to me for free. As I left the store, a strange sense of unease settled over me, but I brushed it off. After all, what harm could an old book do? That night, I settled into my favorite chair, the manuscript in hand. The rain tapped against the windows and the wind howled outside, perfect reading weather. As I began to read, I noticed something odd. The story, though intriguing, seemed strangely familiar. It wasn't long before I realized why. The events in the manuscript mirrored my own life. At first, it was small detailed, like the description of a house that looked eerily similar to mine, or a character with a striking resemblance to me. But as I read on, the similarities grew more unsettling. The manuscript described events that had happened to me, right down to the smallest detail. My pulse quickened as I read about conversations I had just had, places I had just visited. It was as if the manuscript was documenting my life in real time. And then it went further. It began to describe events that hadn't happened yet, chilling, eerie events that filled me with dread. I couldn't stop reading, even as the story grew darker and more ominous. Soon, the manuscript predicted something terrifying. It described a night just like this one, where a storm raged outside, and I was alone in my house, reading by the fire. In the story, the main character, me, began to hear strange noises, whispers carried on the wind. They ignored it at first, just like I was trying to do, but the noises grew louder, more insistent. The manuscript detailed how the character felt a cold presence in the room, how they began to see shadows moving in the corners of their vision. My hands trembled as I realized that everything I was reading was starting to happen to me. I heard a creak in the hallway, followed by a soft whisper. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked up from the manuscript, scanning the room for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the eerie flickering of the fire and the sound of the storm outside. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that the manuscript was playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The manuscript had predicted everything so far, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was leading me toward something terrible. Determined to break the curse, I threw the manuscript into the fire. Flames licked at the edges of the pages, but instead of burning, the manuscript seemed to resist. Fire dimmed, as if being smothered by an unseen force. The room grew colder, and the whispers turned into low, haunting moans. The manuscript sat untouched by the flames, glowing with an eerie light. That's when I knew I couldn't destroy it. It had a hold on me, and it wasn't going to let go. Desperate for answers, I reached out to anyone who might know about cursed objects. Paranormal experts, occultists, anyone who could help. They all told me the same thing. The manuscript was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every page I read. The only way to break the curse was to finish the story, to face whatever horror awaited me at the end. It was a chilling thought, but I knew I had no choice. With trembling hands, I picked up the manuscript and began to read again. The final chapters were the most terrifying, filled with haunting imagery and eerie descriptions that mirrored my deepest fears. But as I reached the last page, the manuscript's power seemed to wane. The whispers faded, the room grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I finished the story, and with it, the curse seemed to break. The manuscript now sits locked away in a chest, hidden where no one can find it. I can't bring myself to destroy it, but I also can't risk anyone else falling under its spell. The experience left me haunted, a chilling reminder of the power of the written word. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the faint whisper of pages turning, as if the manuscript is calling out to me, waiting for someone to read it again. Philadelphia has its fair share of haunted places, but I never expected the historic theater where I worked to be one of them. It was a beautiful old building, steeped in history and filled with stories of its glory days. As an actor, I loved the place, the grand stage, the intricate architecture, the sense of tradition that seemed to linger in the air. But after a few months of rehearsals, I started to notice strange things. First, it was just little quirks, lights flickering, props disappearing, a cold draft that seemed to come from nowhere. We all laughed it off, blaming the building's age. Deep down, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something wasn't right. One evening, after a particularly long rehearsal, I was the last one left in the theater. The silence was oppressive, the darkness creeping in from the corners of the room. As I packed up my things, I heard it, a soft, haunting melody, like someone playing a piano in the distance. I froze, listening intently. The music was faint, but unmistakable, echoing through the empty theater. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I approached the stage, it stopped abruptly. Piano stood silent, covered in dust, as if it hadn't been touched in years. The next day, I mentioned the incident to the other actors. To my surprise, they had all experienced similar occurrences. Ghostly figures seen out of the corner of their eyes, eerie voices whispering in the wings, cold spots that seemed to follow them around. We began to piece together the puzzle and realized that the strange events always seemed to happen in the same part of the theater. The area where the old dressing rooms were located was as if that part of the building held some dark secret, something that refused to stay buried. As the days went on, the haunting presence became more pronounced. During rehearsals, we'd hear footsteps pacing the empty hallways, and sometimes props would move on their own. The most chilling incident happened during a performance. We were in the middle of a scene when suddenly, the fire curtain, a heavy, old piece of equipment that hadn't been used in decades, dropped from the ceiling with a deafening crash. The audience gasped, and we stood frozen in shock. No one could explain how it happened, but I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. Desperate for answers, I began to dig into the theater's history. What I found was chilling. Decades ago, There had been a tragic fire during a performance, and several people had lost their lives, including one of the lead actor. The fire had started in the very area where we had noticed the most activity. It was said that the actor's spirit never left the theater, trapped in the place where he had met his untimely end. The more I learned, the more I became convinced that we were dealing with a restless spirit. One night, after everyone had left, I decided to confront the ghost. Armed with nothing but my determination and a flashlight, I made my way to the old dressing rooms. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was deafening. As I entered the room, I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the door creaked shut behind me. I stood there, my heart pounding, and said aloud, "I know you're here. What do you want?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard a faint whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. "Help me," it said. The next morning, I gathered the cast and crew and told them what I had experienced. Together, we decided to hold a small ceremony in the theater, honoring the memory of those who had died in the fire. We lit candles, said a few words, and offered our respects to the spirits that still lingered. It wasn't much, but it seemed to bring a sense of peace to the theater. The strange occurrences gradually lessened, and the eerie presence that had once haunted the place began to fade. The theater still holds a special place in my heart, but I'll never forget the chilling experiences we had there. Sometimes, when I'm alone on the stage, I can still feel a cold breeze or catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye. But now, I know it's just the spirits of the past, watching over us as we bring their stories to life. The ghostly theater may be haunted, but it's also a place of memories, both tragic and beautiful, and I'm proud to be a part of its story. When a group of friends set out to hike the Appalachian Mountains, they were looking forward to a serene adventure in nature. The path they chose was reputed to be one of the most beautiful in the region, known for its breathtaking views and tranquil surroundings. However, they ventured deeper into the woods. They encountered a path that seemed oddly out of place. It was a narrow, winding trail that seemed to lead them away from their intended route, and an unsettling sense of déjà vu began to creep in. The deeper they went, the more the environment seemed to change. Trees grew denser, their branches intertwining to form an almost impenetrable canopy overhead. The light filtering through the leaves took on a strange, ethereal quality, casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. The air felt cooler, and an inexplicable fog began to roll in, obscuring their view of the path ahead. It was as if they had entered a different realm altogether, one where the normal rules of nature did not apply. The group began to notice that the path seemed to shift and change, leading them in circles. What they thought was a straight trail kept looping back on itself, no matter how far they walked. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and every rustle of the leaves or snap of a twig seemed to carry a hint of malevolence. It was a chilling realization that they were not alone and that something in the woods was aware of their presence. As they continued, friends encountered strange, eerie phenomena. They saw fleeting glimpses of figures moving in the distance, only to have them vanish when approached. Whispers carried on the wind seemed to echo their names, calling out to them with an unsettling familiarity. The whispers grew louder and more urgent, adding to the growing sense of dread that was settling over the group. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step, and an oppressive silence descended upon them. The once clear path was now obscured by the thickening fog, and the distant sounds of the forest seemed to disappear. They could no longer tell which direction they were heading, and the landscape around them seemed to close in, trees pressing closer together as if to trap them. When they finally stumbled upon a small clearing, they were relieved, but the respite was short-lived. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone archway covered in strange runes and symbols. The archway seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light, and the symbols glowed softly in the dim light. The friends felt an inexplicable pull toward the archway, a magnetic force that drew them closer, despite their growing fear. As they approached the archway, they noticed that the symbols began to change, forming unsettling images of people lost and wandering through the woods. It was as if the archway was a gateway, portal to another world or dimension. The sense of foreboding intensified, and they could feel the weight of countless lost souls pressing down on them, urging them to turn back. Just as they were about to cross under the archway, fog thickened to an almost impenetrable density. The friends felt an icy chill sweep over them, and their breaths became visible in the cold air. The archway seemed to shimmer and shift, becoming a haunting gateway to an unknown, potentially dangerous realm. Their instincts screamed at them to retreat, and with great effort, they turned and fled back along the twisted path they had followed. Their escape was frantic, forest around them seeming to conspire to keep them from finding their way back. The eerie whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the forest itself was angry at their departure. When they finally emerged from the woods, they were exhausted and shaken, their once innocent hike transformed into a chilling ordeal that none of them would soon forget. The small-town carnival had always been a place of joy and excitement, but when it came back to town after a long hiatus, the atmosphere had changed. The rides, once brightly colored and bustling with laughter, now appeared faded and forlorn. Despite the carnival's faded charm, a group of thrill-seekers decided to visit, curious to experience the atmosphere of a bygone era. Little did they know, the carnival harbored a dark secret that would soon reveal itself. The group's first stop was a seemingly innocent ride, an old carousel with intricately carved animals frozen in mid-gallop. As they climbed aboard, the carousel began to spin slowly, and an odd, mechanical creaking filled the air. The ride's music, once cheerful, had become hauntingly distorted, playing a tune that seemed to warp and echo with an unsettling quality. It was as if the ride was attempting to communicate something far more sinister than mere entertainment. As the ride picked up speed, the thrill-seekers began to experience unsettling visions. The animals on the carousel seemed to come alive, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. Carnival lights flickered wildly, casting strange, shifting shadows that danced along with the ride. Each spin seemed to stretch time, and the friends felt trapped in a loop, their sense of reality warping with every revolution of the carousel. After escaping the carousel, they ventured to the Ferris wheel, hoping for a change of pace. But the Ferris wheel was no less unsettling. As they ascended, the once familiar view of the carnival transformed into a nightmarish landscape. The lights below seemed to form ghostly figures, and the carnival's joyful music had been replaced by a chorus of mournful wails. From the top, they saw shadows moving between the rides, as if the spirits of the carnival's past were trying to make contact. Determined to uncover the carnival's secret, the group explored the funhouse next. The funhouse, with its warped mirrors and shifting hallways, had a nightmarish quality. The reflections in the mirrors seemed to twist and contort, showing them distorted versions of themselves. The hallways appeared to stretch endlessly, and every turn seemed to lead them deeper into a maze of confusion and dread. The funhouse's unsettling atmosphere was palpable, adding to the growing sense of fear. As they tried to navigate their way out of the funhouse, they discovered an old, dusty ticket booth, tucked away in a corner. Inside, they found a collection of tickets, each one marked with strange symbols and a date from many years ago. The realization dawned on them that the carnival had been hiding more than just faded rides. It held the echoes of those who had come before, their spirits trapped by the cursed rides. When they finally emerged from the funhouse, they noticed that the carnival seemed to be closing around them, the once bustling grounds now eerily deserted. The rides were still, their lights flickering out one by one. It was as if the carnival itself was trying to expel them, unwilling to let anyone uncover its dark secret. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional distant sound of an unseen presence. The group made their way back to the entrance, but the path seemed to shift and twist, leading them further into the carnival's heart. It was as if the carnival was a living entity, actively trying to keep them within its confines. Every step they took was met with an increasing sense of urgency and dread, as if something malevolent was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Finally, they reached the carnival's entrance, but it was now blocked by an unseen barrier. The once open gate was now a solid wall, refusing to let them escape. The group was trapped, their only choice to face the carnival's dark secret, uncover the truth behind its cursed rides. As they prepared for what lay ahead, they could feel the weight of the carnival's history pressing down upon them, chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within. When the symphony orchestra began rehearsing in the historic concert hall, it was supposed to be a celebration of music and tradition. The hall, with its grand architecture and opulent decor, had been a centerpiece of the city's cultural scene for over a century. However, quickly became apparent, the hall harbored more than just the echoes of past performances. An unsettling atmosphere began to settle over the orchestra, hinting at a presence far older and darker than the music they were there to play. From the very first rehearsal, members of the orchestra noticed strange occurrences. Instruments would mysteriously go out of tune, and sheet music seemed to shift or disappear without explanation. The musicians dismissed these oddities as nothing more than the quirks of an old building, but the disturbances grew more pronounced with each passing day. The once familiar acoustics of the hall began to carry a dissonant, ghostly quality, as if the walls themselves were resonating with a hidden melody. One evening, as the orchestra played a particularly haunting piece, the air grew colder, and a chilling draft swept through the hall. Musicians exchanged uneasy glances as they felt an inexplicable presence in the room. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and ghostly figures appeared in the corner of their vision, vanishing when they turned to look. It was as if the spirits of past performers were trying to join in on the concert, their presence lingering in the hall. The conductor, a seasoned professional, began to experience disturbing visions. As he waved his baton, he saw spectral figures in period costumes taking their places among the orchestra. These ghostly musicians seemed to play along with the music, their faces frozen in expressions of sorrow and longing. The conductor struggled to maintain his focus, the weight of the apparition's gaze making it nearly impossible to keep the ensemble together. The presence of the spirits became undeniable when the orchestra members started to hear strange, discordant notes in their music. It was as if unseen hands were altering the performance, adding haunting harmonies that didn't belong. These spectral melodies seemed to tell a story of tragedy and loss, reflecting the hall's dark past. The musicians felt trapped in a never-ending cycle of eerie performances, unable to escape the ghostly influence on their music. One night, after the performance, the orchestra discovered an old hidden door behind the stage. Inside, they found a dusty archive of old documents and photographs related to the hall's history. Among these relics were accounts of a tragic incident involving a previous orchestra and a devastating fire that had claimed many lives. The realization that their haunting was linked to this tragedy only deepened their sense of dread. The archival materials revealed that the ghostly figures they had seen were likely the spirits of the musicians who had perished in the fire. The orchestra's music had inadvertently awakened these restless souls, and the spectral melodies they played were a reflection of their unfulfilled desire to complete their final performance. The old camera had an air of nostalgia about it, brass and leather exterior speaking to a bygone era of photography. I came across it at a quaint flea market in Los Angeles, where the vendors seemed all too eager to sell it. Intrigued by its vintage charm and the story the vendor hinted at, something about a dark past, I decided to purchase it, not knowing the chilling reality that awaited me. The camera, once a prized possession of a forgotten era, was about to reveal secrets best left buried. When I first used the camera, I was captivated by its antique craftsmanship and the crisp, detailed photos it produced. However, as I reviewed the images, I noticed something unsettling. In the corners of each photograph, there were strange, ghostly figures that were not visible at the time of capture. It was as though the camera was capturing not just the physical world, something far more sinister lurking just out of sight. The more I used the camera, the more disturbing the images became. Faces of people I didn't recognize appeared in my photos, their expressions filled with terror and despair. Camera seemed to have a knack for revealing the hidden, the macabre. Each new photograph was a chilling reminder that the camera's lens had an unsettling ability to capture more than just light and shadow, captured something from beyond. Curiosity turned to dread as I began to experience strange occurrences. I would hear whispers in the dead of night, and my apartment felt increasingly oppressive. Shadows moved on their own, and objects seemed to shift or disappear. It became clear that the camera was more than just a relic. It was a conduit to a realm that existed parallel to our own, realm filled with restless spirits and dark energies. Determined to understand the camera's curse, I delved into its history and discovered that it had once belonged to a photographer whose work was shrouded in mystery. The photographer had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a series of photographs that showed unsettling and ghostly images. It seemed that the camera had a malevolent power, capturing not only the physical reality, but also the essence of the haunted souls it had photographed. In an attempt to rid myself of the camera, I tried to destroy it. I burned it, crushed it, and even buried the pieces. But each time, the camera reappeared, whole and undamaged. It was as if the camera had a will of its own, refusing to be discarded or destroyed. Its haunting grip on my life seemed unbreakable, and I found myself trapped in a cycle of fear and fascination. As I continued to use the camera, the images grew increasingly disturbing. Photographs began to show not just ghostly figures, scenes of violence and despair, as if the camera was documenting tragic events that had occurred long before my time. The boundary between reality and the supernatural blurred, and it became nearly impossible to distinguish what was real from what was captured through the lens. One particularly chilling photograph showed my own face, but it was twisted in a grotesque expression of terror. I realized with growing horror that the camera was not only documenting spirits, but also manipulating reality itself. The images it produced were no longer just eerie reminders. They were reflections of a dark force that seemed to be influencing my very existence. Desperate to escape the camera's curse, I sought help from experts in the supernatural. They confirmed that the camera was indeed cursed, origins rooted in a dark and tragic past. The only way to break the curse was to find the spirit that haunted the camera and put its restless soul to rest. But finding and confronting such a malevolent entity was a daunting and dangerous task, fraught with its own risks and uncertainty. In the end, I had to confront the darkest part of the camera's curse. The photographs it had taken were not just images, they were windows into a world of horror and despair. The camera's curse was a chilling reminder that some relics of the past carry with them not just memories, the lingering presence of something far more sinister. The journey to free myself from the camera's grasp had only just begun, and I knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and fears scarcely imagined. The small, unassuming church on the outskirts of town had always seemed like just another relic of the past. Its old stone walls and weathered gravestones hinted at a long history, but nothing prepared me for what lay hidden beneath its ancient floors. While exploring the church's basement, I stumbled upon a hidden trapdoor covered in dust and cobwebs. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Descending the stairs, I found myself in an underground crypt that had clearly been forgotten for centuries. The air was heavy with the smell of mold and decay, and the faint light from my flashlight cast eerie shadows on the walls. The crypt was filled with rows of stone sarcophagi, their surfaces etched with cryptic symbols and faded inscriptions. It was a chilling reminder of a past that had been deliberately concealed from the world above. As I explored further, I noticed that some of the sarcophagi were slightly ajar, revealing dark, empty interiors. An inexplicable sense of dread began to creep over me, as if I was intruding on a sacred space. The temperature in the crypt dropped dramatically, and I could see my breath misting in the cold air. A strange, almost imperceptible whispering began to fill the silence, growing louder and more insistent as I moved deeper into the crypt. In the far corner of the crypt, I discovered an old, ornate coffin that stood out from the rest. It was covered in elaborate carvings and appeared to be in much better condition than the others. The coffin's lid was slightly open, and as I approached, a powerful sense of malevolence washed over me. My flashlight flickered, and I could feel a cold, clammy presence brushing against my skin. It was clear that this coffin held something that was meant to remain undisturbed. Summoning my courage, I pushed the lid open just a crack and peered inside. What I saw was both horrifying and mesmerizing. An ancient figure wrapped in tattered burial cloths, its face obscured by shadows. The figure's eyes seemed to glow with an unsettling light, and I could feel an intense, almost tangible hatred emanating from the coffin. It was as though the figure was aware of my presence and was silently cursing me for disturbing its eternal rest. As I backed away from the coffin, the whispers grew louder, transforming into a chorus of anguished cries. The crypt's temperature plummeted even further, and I felt a sense of being watched from all directions. Shadows seemed to move and shift on their own, and the sarcophagi around me began to rattle and shake. It was as if the crypt itself was awakening, reacting to my intrusion with a terrifying intensity. Desperate to escape, I retraced my steps, only to find that the staircase had disappeared, replaced by a solid wall of stone. Panic set in as I realized that I was trapped in the crypt, with no way to return to the surface. The whispers grew into a cacophony of ghostly voices, each one more urgent and pleading than the last. The once familiar crypt had transformed into a nightmarish labyrinth, with every turn leading me deeper into its dark, oppressive depths. In a final, frantic effort to find a way out, I tried to force open the hidden trapdoor, but it was as if it had fused with the stone. The haunting cries of the spirits filled the air, growing louder and more desperate with every passing moment. The crypt seemed to close in around me, its oppressive darkness swallowing every shred of light and hope. It was clear that the crypt had claimed me as its own, a grim reminder of the dangers of disturbing the forgotten past. The small, secluded village of Ravenswood had always been known for its serene beauty and close-knit community. As the sun set and darkness enveloped the village, a sinister force began to emerge. Strange occurrences had started to plague the townspeople, shadows moving independently of their sources and whispers that seemed to drift through the night air. The village's once peaceful nights were now filled with a sense of dread and unease. The phenomenon began with inexplicable shadows appearing on walls and streets, shifting and contorting as if they had a life of their own. People reported seeing these shadows darting around corners and disappearing before their eyes. At first, the villagers thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a figment of their imagination. But as the sightings grew more frequent and intense, they could no longer dismiss them as mere illusion. The whispers that accompanied the shadows were even more unsettling. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible, like the murmuring of a distant crowd. But as the nights wore on, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. They seemed to be speaking directly to the villagers, their voices carrying an ominous message that sent chills down the spines of those who heard them. The whispers seemed to be taunting and threatening, adding to the growing atmosphere of fear and paranoia. One particularly dark night, a group of brave villagers decided to investigate the source of these eerie occurrences. Armed with flashlights and a sense of determination, they ventured into the woods surrounding Ravenswood, where the shadows seemed to be originating. Forest, usually a place of tranquility, now felt like a labyrinth of fear, its trees looming like silent sentinels. As they delved deeper into the forest, the whispers grew louder, echoing through the trees and creating an almost unbearable cacophony. The shadows appeared more pronounced, writhing and twisting as if they were alive. The air became thick with a palpable sense of malevolence, and the villagers began to feel as though they were being watched by unseen eyes. Eventually, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin that seemed to be the epicenter of the phenomena. The cabin, overgrown with vines and shrouded in darkness, exuded an aura of ancient evil. Inside, the whispers grew more coherent, forming words and phrases that spoke of betrayal, sorrow, and vengeance. The shadows inside the cabin danced and flickered with a haunting intensity, casting grotesque shapes on the walls. The villagers discovered a hidden room in the cabin, filled with old, dusty artifacts and faded photographs. Among these relics were symbols and inscriptions that seemed to tell a story, a long-forgotten tragedy. The whispers and shadows seemed to be connected to this tragic past, as if they were manifestations of the pain and anger of those who had suffered. As they examined the artifacts, one of the villagers found an old journal detailing a series of events that had led to a great betrayal and the death of innocent people. The journal's entries were filled with anguish and regret, and it became clear that the shadows and whispers were the restless spirits of those wronged long ago, seeking closure and retribution. With this realization, the villagers performed a ritual to appease the spirits and put their souls to rest. The ceremony was fraught with tension and fear, but as they followed the ancient rites, the whispers began to fade, and the shadows grew less menacing. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the village of Ravenswood slowly returned to its peaceful state, though the memory of the whispering shadows lingered as a chilling reminder of the past. Vermont is known for its charming inns and cozy getaways, but the secluded inn nestled deep in the woods had a reputation that went beyond just charm. It was a place of mystery, shrouded in the fog of its dark history. The locals avoided it, speaking only in whispers about the eerie events that had taken place there over a century ago. To me, that only added to its allure. When I had the chance to stay there, I couldn't resist. The inn was beautiful, with its quaint rooms and rustic decor, but there was something off about it. The air inside was heavy, and the silence seemed to press in from all sides, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. First night, I had trouble sleeping. The bed was comfortable enough, but the atmosphere in the room was unsettling. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and I kept hearing faint noises, soft footsteps in the hallway, creak of floorboards, the sound of a door opening and closing. At first, I thought it was just other guests, but when I stepped out into the hallway to investigate, I found it empty. The inn was quiet, too quiet, and a chill ran down my spine as I returned to my room. The next morning, I mentioned the noises to the innkeeper, an elderly woman who had been running the inn for decades. She smiled knowingly and said that I wasn't the first guest to hear things that couldn't be explained. She told me about the inn's history, how it had once been the site of a gruesome murder in the late 1800s. A guest had been killed in one of the rooms, and though the murderer had never been caught, it was said that the victim's spirit still lingered, unable to find peace. The inn had changed hands many times over the years, but the strange occurrences had never stopped. That evening, as I sat by the fireplace in the lounge, I overheard two other guests talking in hushed voices. They spoke of seeing ghostly apparitions in their rooms, figures that would appear in the middle of the night, standing at the foot of their beds, watching them sleep. Their stories sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to brush it off as just overactive imaginations. After all, the power of suggestion is strong, especially in a place like this. But that night, a haunting presence made itself known. I had just settled into bed when I felt the temperature in the room drop suddenly, and the air grew thick with a chilling energy. The wind outside seemed to die down, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in on me from all sides. Then I heard it, a soft knock on the door. My heart raced as I lay there, listening. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Gathering my courage, I got up and opened the door, expecting to find one of the other guests. The hallway was empty, dark, and still. I closed the door and returned to bed, trying to calm my nerves. But as I pulled the covers up, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A dark figure standing in the corner of the room. It was barely visible in the dim light, but I could make out the shape of a person, standing motionless, watching me. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But before I could react, figures slowly faded away, leaving behind only the oppressive silence. The next morning, I decided to cut my stay short. As I packed my bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that the inn was watching me. The spirits trapped within its walls were waiting for me to leave so they could return to their eerie existence. The innkeeper seemed to understand my decision, her knowing smile telling me that she had seen this happen before. As I drove away, I glanced back at the inn, its windows dark and empty, and I knew that I had escaped something far more sinister than just a restless spirit. The Phantom Inn remains a place of mystery, a place where the past and present collide in eerie and unsettling ways. It's a place I'll never forget, but it's also a place I'll never return to. Some stories are best left unfinished, and some places are best left undisturbed. Botanists dream of finding untouched gardens, places where nature has been allowed to grow wild and free. But the hidden garden we discovered in Washington was beyond anything we could have imagined. It was tucked away in a dense forest, far from any trails, and completely overgrown with ancient trees and tangled vines. We stumbled upon it by accident during a research expedition, drawn in by the strange, glowing plants that seemed to pulse with life. At first glance, it was a beautiful, almost magical place. But as we ventured deeper into the garden, we began to realize that this place was different. Enchanted, perhaps, but also deeply unsettling. The air in the garden was thick with a sweet, intoxicating scent that made our heads swim. Plants were unlike anything we'd ever seen before. Flowers that shimmered in the sunlight, vines that moved as if they had a mind of their own, and trees that seemed to whisper secrets on the wind. The further we went, the more the garden seemed to come alive. The plants reacted to our presence, leaning toward us, brushing against our skin, and filling the air with strange, haunting melodies. It was beautiful. There was something eerie about it, too. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. As we explored, we found remnants of old structures, stone walls, crumbling fountains, and statues that had been overtaken by moss and vines. It was clear that this garden had once been cultivated by human hands, but it had long since been abandoned to the wild. We speculated about who might have built it and why they had left, but no answers presented themselves. The only thing that was certain was that the garden was ancient, older than any of us had expected. And as the day wore on, the garden's enchanting beauty began to take on a darker, more sinister tone. Strange things started happening. We would see movement out of the corner of our eyes, shadows flitting between the trees, figures that disappeared as soon as we tried to focus on them. The air grew colder, and the once pleasant scent of the flowers turned sour, like rotting fruit. Plants, which had seemed so inviting at first, now felt oppressive, their vines wrapping around our legs and arms as if trying to hold us in place. The whispers in the wind grew louder, more insistent, until they formed words, soft, chilling voices that seemed to come from all around us. It was then that we realized the truth. The garden wasn't just alive, it was sentient. It knew we were there, and it didn't want us to leave. Plants seemed to close in around us. Paths we had walked earlier now overgrown and impossible to navigate. Panic set in as we tried to find our way out. But the garden seemed to shift and change with every step we took, leading us deeper into its heart. The whispers grew louder and the vines tighter, until it felt like the garden was suffocating us, trapping us in its enchanted grip. In the center of the garden, we found a massive tree, its roots stretching out like the fingers of a giant hand. At its base was a small stone altar, overgrown with moss and surrounded by strange, glowing flowers. The air here was thick with a dark energy, and the whispers became deafening, filling our minds with thoughts that weren't our own. It was clear that this altar was the source of the garden's power, and we knew we had to do something to break free. Desperate, we tore away the vines and dug into the earth around the altar, searching for anything that might explain the garden's enchantment. What we found was chilling, a small weathered box, buried beneath the roots of the tree. Inside were fragments of old bones, wrapped in ancient cloth. It was a burial site, a place of sacrifice. and the garden had grown from the dark magic that had been performed there centuries ago. The spirits of those who had been sacrificed were bound to the garden, giving it life but also trapping anyone who entered. With no other choice, we performed a ritual of our own, using the knowledge we had gleaned from our studies. We recited incantations, burned herbs, and offered our own small sacrifices to the spirits. The air grew tense, and for a moment, felt like the garden might consume us. But then, slowly, vines began to loosen, and the whispers faded into silence. The garden's grip on us weakened, and we were able to find our way back to the entrance. We left the enchanted garden behind, but the memory of it still haunts me. The beauty and terror of that place are etched into my mind, a reminder that nature can be as cruel as it is beautiful. The garden is still out there, waiting for the next unwitting explorers to stumble upon it. And when they do, I hope they're prepared for what lies within. Driving through the remote roads of New Mexico can feel like traveling through another world. Vast, open desert stretches for miles, with only the occasional tumbleweed or distant mountain to break the monotony. It was on one of these isolated roads that I found myself one evening, the sun setting behind me as I headed toward my destination. The road was empty, save for my car, and the silence was broken only by the hum of the engine. But as the light began to fade and the shadows grew longer, I noticed something strange. Figure standing at the side of the road, barely visible in the twilight. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, figure became clearer. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, standing perfectly still, staring out into the desert. I slowed down, thinking he might need help, but as I approached, he turned to look at me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His face was pale and gaunt, the eyes hollow and empty. Before I could react, he vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke. My heart raced as I drove past the spot where he had been standing. There was no sign of him, just the empty road and the darkening sky. I tried to shake off the encounter, convincing myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I continued down the road, I began to notice more strange things. The air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, despite the fact that I was in the middle of the desert. The headlights of my car barely pierced the mist, and the road seemed to twist and turn in ways that didn't make sense. I checked the GPS, but it had lost signal, leaving me alone in the eerie silence. That's when the whispers started. Faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the engine, but they grew louder with each passing mile. It was as if the wind itself was speaking to me, carrying voices from another time. Couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading, desperate, and filled with sorrow. Whispers seemed to surround the car, coming from all directions, and no matter how loud I turned up the radio, couldn't drown them out. It was as if the road itself was alive, haunted by the spirits of those who had traveled it before me. Then, out of the fog, I saw another figure, this time a woman, standing in the middle of the road. Her long, dark hair blew in the wind, and her dress fluttered like a ghostly shroud. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest, but before I could stop, she vanished, just like the man before her. Car skidded to a halt, and I sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of what I had seen. The road was empty again, but the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Desperate to escape, I started driving again, faster this time, hoping to outrun whatever was haunting me. The road seemed endless, stretching on into the night with no sign of civilization. Fog thickened, and the headlights cast eerie shadows that danced and flickered at the edge of my vision. I felt trapped, as if the road had become a labyrinth, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. The whispers turned into low, mournful wails, filling the car with a chilling sense of despair. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small gas station, barely visible through the fog, its neon sign flickering like a beacon in the darkness. I pulled in, relieved to find a place that seemed grounded in reality. The attendant, an old man with weathered skin and tired eyes, looked at me with a knowing expression as I filled up the tank. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and grave. The ghosts of the road. He told me that the road was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had died in tragic accidents over the years. Some had been lost to the desert, their bodies never found, while others had perished in collisions on the lonely highway. Their spirits, he said, were trapped, unable to move on, forever wandering the road in search of peace. He warned me to be careful, to keep driving until I reached the next town, and not to stop for anything, no matter what I saw. I took his advice and left the gas station, my nerves on edge as I continued down the haunted road. Fog slowly began to lift, and the whispers faded into the distance, but the memory of those ghostly figures stayed with me. When I finally reached the safety of the next town, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and I knew I'd never forget that eerie stretch of road. The ghostly highway of New Mexico is a place I'll never travel again. A chilling reminder that some roads are better left untraveled. England is full of old cathedrals, each with its own history and charm, but the one I visited in a small, forgotten village was different. And the moment I stepped inside, I could feel the weight of its dark past pressing down on me. The cathedral was beautiful in its own way, with towering stone columns and stained glass windows that cast eerie, colorful shadows on the floor. But there was something else, an oppressive atmosphere that made it hard to breathe, as if the very walls were alive with the spirits of those who had perished there. The village itself was nearly abandoned, with only a handful of residents still living in the shadow of the cathedral. They avoided the place, speaking only in whispers about the tragedy that had befallen it centuries ago. Fire had swept through the cathedral during a service, trapping dozens of monks and villagers inside. The flames consumed everything, and the bodies were never recovered. It was said that their spirits still lingered, haunting the cathedral, unable to find peace. As I explored the vast, echoing halls, I began to notice strange things. The air was thick with the scent of smoke, despite the fire having taken place so long ago. The shadows seemed to move on their own, shifting and twisting in ways that defied logic. And then there were the voices, soft, chanting in Latin, as if the monks were still performing their sacred rituals. The sound was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder as I ventured deeper into the cathedral, filling the air with a chilling sense of unease. The crypt was the most unsettling part of the cathedral. Descending into the cold, dark underground chamber felt like entering another world, a place where the living didn't belong. The stone walls were damp, and the air was heavy with the scent of decay. The crypt was lined with old tombs, their inscriptions worn away by time. As I walked through the narrow passageways, I could feel eyes watching me, and the temperature seemed to drop with each step. The chanting grew louder, echoing off the walls, and I could see faint, ghostly figures moving in the darkness. Suddenly, the candles that had been flickering dimly along the walls went out, plunging the crypt into darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, I heard it, a soft, mournful wail coming from the depths of the crypt. The sound sent chills down my spine, and I froze, too terrified to move. The wail grew louder, more desperate, and I could feel the presence of someone, behind me. When I finally mustered the courage to turn around, I saw them. Ghostly monks, their faces pale and sorrowful, their robes tattered and burnt. The monks moved toward me, their forms barely visible in the darkness. Their mouths moved in silent prayer, but their eyes were filled with pain and fear. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the spirits were holding me in place. The air grew colder, and the wail turned into a haunting chant that echoed through the crypt, filling my mind with images of the fire that had consumed them. I could see the flames, hear the screams, feel the heat on my skin, even though I knew it was just a vision. Desperate to escape, I whispered a prayer of my own, hoping to appease the spirits. The monks paused, their eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment the chanting stopped. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel their sorrow, their longing for peace. Slowly, the monks began to fade, their forms dissolving into the shadows. The candles flickered back to life, casting a dim light over the crypt, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly. I took that moment to flee, racing up the stairs and out of the cathedral, the sound of the chanting still echoing in my ears. When I reached the safety of the village, I looked back at the cathedral, its stone walls looming ominously against the darkening sky. I knew then that the spirits of the monks would never leave. They were bound to that place, trapped by the fire that had claimed their lives. The haunted cathedral is a place I'll never forget, a reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the tragedies that can echo through time. When the traveling carnival rolled into our small Midwestern town, it seemed like a dream come true. Bright lights and cheerful music lured in everyone, from children to the elderly, eager for a night of fun. But from the moment I stepped through the gates, I felt something was off. Performers were strange, their smiles a little too wide, their eyes unnaturally bright. There was a chilling undercurrent to the carnival, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I wandered through the carnival, trying to shake the eerie feeling that clung to me. The games were rigged, but that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way the prizes seemed to move on their own, twitching and shifting in the shadows. The rides creaked ominously, and the laughter that filled the air had a haunting edge to it. But it wasn't until I reached the freak show tent that I realized just how wrong this carnival truly was. Inside the tent, the performers were unlike anything I had ever seen. They weren't human, not entirely. Their twisted forms and unnerving gazes seemed to follow me as I moved through the tent. One of them, contortionist, too many joints, whispered something as I passed by. A warning, thing. But before I could make sense of it, I was ushered out by a grinning clown, his painted smile hiding something far darker beneath. As the night wore on, I noticed that some of the visitors were missing. People who had entered the carnival with me were nowhere to be found. I asked around, but no one seemed to remember them. It was as if they had never existed. The chilling realization hit me. The carnival was taking people, and once you entered, you might never leave. Desperate to escape, I headed for the exit, but the gates were gone. In their place was a dense fog, swirling with shadows that whispered my name. The carnival's layout had changed, twisting into a labyrinth that I couldn't navigate. Every turn brought me back to the same eerie attractions, each one more haunting than the last. It was as if the carnival was alive, and it wasn't going to let me go. I tried to find help, but the carnival workers just smiled at me, their eyes gleaming with malice. They knew I was trapped, and they reveled in it. The performers seemed to grow more grotesque as the night went on, their inhuman features becoming more pronounced. The air grew colder, and the music turned discordant, like a broken record playing in reverse. The carnival had shifted from fun to something much more sinister, and I could feel its malevolent presence closing in on me. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I remembered the contortionist's whispered warning. I retraced my steps to the freak show tent, hoping to find some clue that would lead me out. Inside, the performers watched me with those eerie, unblinking eyes. But this time, they didn't try to stop me. At the back of the tent, hidden behind a curtain, I found a small, unmarked door. It pulsed with dark energy, and I knew it was my only way out. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped through. The world twisted around me, the colors and sounds blending into a nightmarish blur. For a moment, I thought I had made a terrible mistake. Then the fog lifted, and I found myself outside the carnival, back in the quiet streets of my town. The carnival was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. But the memory of it lingered, a haunting reminder of what I had escaped. To this day, I can still hear the faint echoes of carnival music in the distance. And I know that somewhere, the eerie carnival is setting up in another town, waiting for its next victims. I was lucky to escape, but others might not be so fortunate. And when I see a carnival rolling into town, I make sure to steer clear, because I know that not all who enter will ever leave. When my family inherited the old Victorian dollhouse from a distant relative, we were thrilled. It was a beautiful, intricately designed piece, complete with tiny furniture and delicate figurines. The dollhouse had been in our family for generations, passed down through the years, and now it was ours. But from the moment we brought it into our home, strange things began to happen. It started small. Objects in the house would move on their own, doors would creak open, and we'd hear faint footsteps when no one was around. It was eerie, but we didn't think much of it at first. The real trouble began when we noticed that the dollhouse seemed to replicate our home exactly. Every detail, down to the smallest piece of furniture, was mirrored in the miniature version. At first, we found it charming, but then we noticed something chilling. The figurines inside the dollhouse began to move. They weren't where we had left them, and sometimes they'd be positioned in ways that made our skin crawl. One night, we found the tiny figurines of our family gathered around the dollhouse's dining table, just as we had been that evening. As the days went on, the dollhouse seemed to take on a life of its own. We'd find new items in the miniature rooms that hadn't been there before. Objects that mirrored events in our own lives. A broken vase appeared in the dollhouse the same day one shattered in our living room. Tiny, eerie figure showed up in the attic room of the dollhouse, and that night we heard strange noises coming from our attic. It was as if the dollhouse was predicting the future, and the future it showed was far from pleasant. One evening, we found the figurines of our family in positions that chilled us to the bone. They were lying on the floor, twisted in unnatural poses, as if something terrible had happened to them. That night, we were awakened by loud crashes and bangs throughout the house. We rushed downstairs, only to find the living room in disarray as if a storm had passed through. The dollhouse was untouched. The figurines remained in those same disturbing positions. We knew then that the dollhouse was more than just a toy. It was cursed. Determined to get rid of it, we decided to sell the dollhouse. But no matter what we did, it always found its way back to us. We'd leave it at the antique shop, only to find it sitting on our front porch the next morning. We tried to destroy it, but the wood wouldn't burn, and the pieces wouldn't break. It was as if the dollhouse was indestructible, bound to us in some unholy way. The more we tried to rid ourselves of it, the stronger its influence became. The final straw came when we found the figurines of our family once again. This time, they were gathered around the front door of the dollhouse, as if they were leaving. That night, we experienced the most terrifying event of all. Our entire house seemed to come alive. Doors slammed, windows rattled, and the walls seemed to pulse with energy. We huddled together, too frightened to move. The house shook around us. When it finally stopped, we found the dollhouse in the center of the living room, perfectly intact. Realizing that we couldn't escape the curse, we decided to lock the dollhouse away in the attic. Been years since that night, and we haven't touched it since. But every so often, we hear faint noises coming from the attic, the sound of tiny footsteps, the creak of miniature doors. We know the dollhouse is still up there, waiting. And though we've tried to forget about it, the memory lingers, haunting reminder of the dark power it holds. Late-night study sessions at the university library were usually peaceful. Quiet halls, the faint rustle of pages turning, and the soft glow of desk lamps casting shadows on the walls. But one night, as I sat alone in the library, something changed. Air grew colder, and the atmosphere shifted, taking on a haunting quality. At first I thought it was just the fatigue setting in, but then I noticed it. Figure, barely visible, moving between the shelves. It was an eerie sight, and my heart skipped a beat as I realized that I wasn't as alone as I had thought. The figure was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, like something out of another era. It moved silently, its form almost transparent, drifting between the stacks of books. I tried to convince myself that it was just another student, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The figure didn't seem to notice me, or anyone else for that matter. It moved with a purpose, as if it was searching for something, or someone, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving me with a chilling sense of unease. Determined to find out what I had seen, I began asking around about the library's history. What I discovered was haunting. Decades ago, a fire had ravaged the university, destroying much of the campus. The library had been one of the only buildings to survive, not without tragedy. Several students had been trapped inside, and their bodies were never recovered. It was said that their spirits still lingered, unable to move on, and that they could be seen wandering the library late at night, searching for the books they had been reading when they died. As the nights went on, I began to experience more strange occurrences. Books would appear on my desk that I hadn't checked out, their pages filled with strange symbols and eerie illustrations. I would hear whispers, faint and indistinct, coming from the darkest corners of the library. The air would grow cold, and I would feel a presence standing behind me, watching me with unseen eyes. It was as if the library itself was alive, and the spirits trapped within its walls were reaching out to me, pulling me into their world. One night, I found a book that wasn't like the others. It was old and worn, its pages yellowed with age, and it seemed to radiate a dark energy. The title was in a language I couldn't understand, and the text was filled with strange, haunting images that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. As I read, I felt the world around me begin to blur, the lines between reality and the book's twisted world starting to fade. It was as if the book was pulling me in, trapping me in its dark pages. Suddenly, I was no longer in the library. I was standing in a vast, dark realm, surrounded by towering shelves filled with books that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, and the only light came from a dim, eerie glow that seemed to emanate from the books themselves. I could hear the faint whispers of the spirits all around me, their voices echoing through the darkness. They were calling out to me, guiding me deeper into the labyrinth of the Phantom Library. I wandered through the endless halls, lost in a maze of books and shadows. The spirits grew closer, their forms becoming more distinct as they followed me through the library. I could feel their cold presence at my back, their icy breath on my neck. They whispered secrets dark and terrible, and I knew that if I listened too closely, I would never find my way out. But the more I tried to escape, the deeper I seemed to go, until I was certain I would be trapped in the Phantom Library forever. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I found a door hidden among the shelves. It was old and worn, its surface covered in strange, intricate carvings. With trembling hands, I pushed it open and stepped through. The world shifted around me, and I found myself back in the university library. Cold air and dark whispers fading away. The book lay closed on the desk before me, its pages still and silent, as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. The Phantom Library was real, and I had barely escaped its clutches. Since that night, I've stayed away from the library after dark. The memory of the Phantom Library still haunts me, chilling reminder of the spirits that linger in the shadows, waiting for the next curious soul to pull into their world. The book is gone, but I know it's out there somewhere, waiting to be found again. And when it is, I hope whoever finds it is prepared for the dark secrets it holds. When the abandoned hospital on the outskirts of Pennsylvania came onto our radar, we were intrigued by its eerie reputation. Once a bustling medical facility, it had been closed for decades after a series of inexplicable incidents and allegations of inhumane experiment. Urban explorers like us were drawn to its chilling history and the promise of uncovering long-buried secrets. Buildings' decaying exterior and broken windows gave it a foreboding presence. But it was the stories of its past that truly sent shivers down our spine. As we entered the hospital, the air was heavy with the scent of mold and decay, the silence only broken by our footsteps, echoing through the empty halls. The walls were lined with old, faded medical charts and posters, and the floors were littered with debris. It was unsettlingly quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old structure settling, and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures scurrying through the darkness. Every room we entered seemed to hold a piece of the past, a fragment of the hospital's tragic history. The further we ventured, the more the hospital seemed to come alive with a haunting presence. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, and strange noises echoed through the empty corridors. Soft moans, distant cries, and the occasional clattering of something unseen. The temperature dropped noticeably as we moved deeper into the building, a stark contrast to the warm night air outside. It was as if the hospital itself was trying to keep us out, to deter us from discovering its secrets. One of the most unsettling discoveries was the old surgical theater, still equipped with rusting medical instruments and blood-stained tiles. It was here that the whispers of the hospital's dark past seemed to converge. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of dread, and the air felt charged with a palpable, oppressive energy. We could almost hear the echoes of past screams, pain and suffering that had occurred within these walls. It was a chilling reminder of the atrocities committed here. In the depths of the hospital, we found a series of underground rooms that had once been used for experimental procedures. These rooms were small and windowless, cold, metal tables, and strange devices scattered about. The walls were covered in old, faded medical charts and diagrams, depicting grotesque experiments and disturbing procedures. The sight of these old records was enough to make our skin crawl, but it was the feeling of being watched truly unsettled us. As we continued our exploration, we began to experience more direct encounters with the spirits that were said to haunt the hospital. We saw fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures moving just out of reach, and we heard voices, soft, plaintive cries that seemed to come from nowhere. Each encounter left us with a sense of profound unease, as if the spirits were trying to communicate their suffering, or perhaps warn us of the dangers that lay ahead. The old patient wards were particularly haunting. The rooms were filled with rusting beds and broken medical equipment, and the walls were covered in grime and decay. It was here that we felt the most intense presence, as if the spirits of former patients were still trapped in their final moments of agony. The feeling of being watched was almost overwhelming, and we could hear whispers and cries that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. At one point, we stumbled upon a small chapel within the hospital, its once sacred space now desecrated and covered in layers of dust and grime. The chapel had been used for patients to find solace, but now it was a dark and eerie place, filled with broken pews and overturned religious artifacts. The atmosphere in the chapel was especially unsettling, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent was watching us from the shadows. The deeper we went, the more the hospital seemed to reveal its dark history. We found old records and documents detailing unethical experiments conducted on unsuspecting patients. The sheer horror of these revelations was compounded by the feeling of being constantly watched, as if the spirits of those who had suffered here were still lingering, unable to find peace. The knowledge that these horrors had occurred within these very walls made the experience all the more chilling. As the night wore on, the hospital seemed to grow more oppressive, spirits more active. We began to notice that the building itself seemed to shift and change, as if it were alive and aware of our presence. Corridors seemed to twist and turn, leading us in circles and making it nearly impossible to find our way back to the entrance. It was as if the hospital was playing a cruel game with us, keeping us trapped within its haunted confines. Our final encounter was the most intense. We found ourselves in a room that seemed to pulsate with a dark energy, air thick with a malevolent presence. The temperature dropped sharply, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Shadows danced along the walls, and we felt a powerful force trying to push us out of the room. It was clear that the spirits here were not just haunting, they were angry, vengeful, and desperate to protect their dark secret. When we heard about the abandoned amusement park in California, it sounded like the perfect setting for an adventure. The park had been closed for years after a series of mysterious accidents and sightings of ghostly figures. Intrigued by the tales and looking for a thrill, a group of friends and I decided to sneak in and explore. The park's entrance, overgrown with weeds and rusted beyond recognition, set the stage for what would become a night of chilling discoveries. As we entered the park, the atmosphere was eerily quiet. The once vibrant colors of the rides had faded, leaving behind a ghostly, desolate landscape. The rides, now motionless, stood like silent sentinels in the moonlight, their mechanical parts creaking softly in the breeze. Felt as though we had stepped into a forgotten world, where time had stopped and the park was waiting for someone to remember it. We began our exploration near the old carousel, its painted horses frozen in mid-gallop, their once bright colors now dulled and peeling. Carousel's haunting, warped music played softly, as if on an endless loop, and we could almost hear the laughter of children from years gone by. The sound was unsettling, a reminder of the park's joyful past, now tainted by an eerie, ghostly present. Moving on, we ventured toward the roller coaster, its twisted tracks and rusted cars standing as a testament to the passage of time. As we climbed the stairs to the observation deck, the air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring our view of the park. The fog seemed to be alive, swirling around us with a menacing, almost sentient quality. It was as if the park itself was reacting to our presence, pushing us away. We decided to take a ride on the Ferris wheel, hoping to get a better view of the park from above. As we ascended, the creaking of the wheel and the gusts of wind made the experience more unsettling than expected. From the top, we saw shadows moving through the park below, fleeting glimpses of figures that seemed out of place. The Ferris wheel's motion became jerky, as if it was struggling to move, and we felt a growing sense of dread. The most chilling part of our adventure was discovering the old funhouse. The distorted mirrors and warped hallways created a nightmarish maze, and the once cheerful music had taken on a haunting quality. The mirrors seemed to twist and distort our reflections, showing us ghastly, ghostly versions of ourselves. As we moved through the maze, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and we could hear whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. We stumbled upon an old ticket booth, its windows shattered and its interior covered in dust. Inside, we found old tickets and promotional materials, but it was the strange, inexplicable coldness that gripped us as we approached. The air around the booth seemed to vibrate with a chilling energy, and we could feel an oppressive weight settling over us. The sensation was both terrifying and disorienting. As the night progressed, the park began to feel less like a place and more like a living entity. The rides seemed to operate on their own, moving and groaning as though powered by unseen forces. The laughter we had heard earlier now echoed through the park, mingling with the soft, mournful cries that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The sensation of being watched was ever present, and it became increasingly difficult to shake the feeling that something was following us. Desperate to leave, we made our way toward the exit, but the park seemed to have changed its layout. Paths we had taken earlier were now twisted and unfamiliar, and we found ourselves back at the carousel, despite having moved in the opposite direction. The sense of being trapped grew stronger, and the fog thickened, making it almost impossible to see. It was as if the park was toying with us, its ghostly inhabitants enjoying our confusion. Finally, we managed to find our way back to the entrance, but as we left, we could still feel the park's eerie presence lingering. The memories of that night would stay with us forever, a haunting reminder of the ghostly amusement park and the restless spirits that called it home. As we drove away, the park seemed to watch us, its shadowy outline fading into the night, leaving us with a chilling sense of unease. It all began when I stumbled upon an ancient mask at a small antique shop in New York City. The shopkeeper seemed oddly eager to part with it, his eyes darting nervously as he wrapped the mask for me. It was an exquisite piece, adorned with intricate patterns and dark gemstones that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. The mask had a haunting beauty, but from the moment I put it on, something shifted in the air around me. The first night I wore the mask, I felt a strange, almost palpable sense of unease. My reflection in the mirror looked back at me with an unsettling intensity, the mask's eyes seeming to follow my every move. The air grew colder, and a whispering voice seemed to emanate from the mask itself. I dismissed it as my imagination running wild, but as the days went by, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and impossible to ignore. Soon, I began to notice changes in my behavior. The mask seemed to influence my actions, pushing me to act out of character. I found myself making impulsive decisions and saying things I would never normally say. Friends and family grew concerned, but I brushed off their worries, convinced that the mask was just a beautiful, albeit unsettling artifact. However, the influence of the mask only grew stronger, and my control over my own actions began to slip. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the mask's influence reached its peak. I was compelled to put it on again, despite the growing dread that filled me. As soon as the mask covered my face, I felt a dark presence envelop me. My movements were no longer my own. I was being controlled by something far more sinister. The whispers became a chorus of demands, urging me to act out in increasingly disturbing ways. The mask's power became undeniable when I began to experience vivid, terrifying visions. I saw scenes of violence and chaos, the mask's influence warping my perception of reality. These visions were not just in my mind. They began to seep into the real world. I would see shadowy figures lurking in the corners of my vision, their eyes glowing with malevolence. It was as if the mask had opened a gateway to another realm, one filled with dark entities that were now encroaching on my own world. Desperate to rid myself of the mask, I tried to destroy it. I attempted to burn it, smash it, and even bury it, but every time I tried, the mask seemed to reappear in my possession, as if it were impervious to my attempts. The mask's grip on me tightened, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread as it continued to exert its influence. It became clear that the mask was not merely an object, it was a vessel for something much darker. The final straw came when I started to hear the mask's whispers, even when it wasn't on my face. The voice grew louder, more demanding, and it seemed to be trying to convince me to commit terrible acts. The mask's influence had become all-consuming, and I could no longer distinguish between my own thoughts and those implanted by the malevolent force residing within it. My sense of reality began to blur, and I feared for my sanity. In a last-ditch effort to escape the mask's curse, I sought out experts in occult and paranormal phenomena. They confirmed my worst fears. The mask was cursed, bound with dark magic that sought to possess its wearer completely. They warned me that breaking the curse would require a ritual of great complexity and danger, one that could either free me or doom me further. The thought of facing the mask again filled me with terror, but I knew I had no other choice. The ritual was grueling and fraught with peril. It involved incantations and symbols that seemed to stir the very air around me. As I performed the ritual, the mask's whispers grew louder, its presence almost tangible. I could feel the malevolent force within it, battling against the ritual's power, trying to cling to me with all its might. The struggle was intense, and I was pushed to the brink of my endurance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the ritual came to an end. The mask lay motionless on the floor, its dark energy seemingly dissipated. I felt a profound sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. The experience had left its mark on me, and the memory of the mask's influence would forever haunt me. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death, and I vowed never to let such dark forces into my life again. Even now, I occasionally catch glimpses of the mask's reflection in my dreams. The whispers have faded, but the memory of its chilling presence remains with me. I often wonder if the mask's curse was truly lifted, or if a part of its darkness still lingers within me. It's a haunting reminder of the dangers that lie hidden in seemingly innocuous objects, and a lesson learned the hard way. When the new teacher, Miss Carter, arrived at the rural schoolhouse, she was excited to start her new job. The quaint building, with its old wooden floors and vintage chalkboards, seemed like the perfect setting for teaching. However, she quickly discovered that the schoolhouse held more than just old textbooks and dusty desks. Strange occurrences began almost immediately, each one more unsettling than the last. The building had a chilling presence that grew more pronounced with every passing day. It started with the flickering lights and creaky floors that seemed to act of their own accord. Miss Carter dismissed these as typical quirks of an old building, but soon she noticed other, more disturbing phenomena. She would find classroom supplies rearranged in ways that made no sense, as if someone or something had been moving them around. The atmosphere in the schoolhouse became increasingly tense, with the feeling that someone was watching her, even when she was alone. The most disturbing incident happened one evening while Miss Carter was grading papers. The classroom grew suddenly cold, and she heard the faint sound of children's laughter echoing through the empty hallways. The laughter grew louder, more frantic, until it was almost deafening. When she went to investigate, she found nothing out of the ordinary. The chilling sound lingered in her ears. She couldn't shake the feeling that the laughter was not just a figment of her imagination, but a ghostly remnant of a past long forgotten. One afternoon, while preparing for a parent-teacher meeting, Miss Carter stumbled upon a hidden door behind a bookshelf. It led to a small, dusty room that had been untouched for decades. Inside, she found old, yellowed school records and photographs of children who had once attended the schoolhouse. The photographs were haunting. The children's faces were eerily expressionless, their eyes staring out from the frames with an unsettling intensity. As the days went by, presence in the schoolhouse grew more aggressive. Miss Carter began to experience unexplained cold spots and noticed that objects would disappear and reappear in different locations. She also saw fleeting glimpses of a figure in the corner of her eye, always just out of sight. The figure seemed to be a young child. Whenever she turned to look, there was nothing there. It was as if the spirit was playing a cruel game with her. The final straw came when Miss Carter began to receive mysterious notes, scrawled in childish handwriting, that appeared on her desk and in the classroom. The notes were filled with cryptic messages and demands for help. They spoke of a tragedy that had occurred many years ago, involving a child who had died under mysterious circumstances. The notes were heart-wrenching, pleading for someone to remember and honor the lost child. Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Carter delved into the school's history, searching for any records or stories that could explain the haunting. What she discovered was a tale of a tragic accident that had claimed the life of a young student many years ago. The accident had been covered up, and the child's death had been shrouded in secrecy. It seemed that the schoolhouse was haunted by the spirit of this child, seeking recognition and justice for a life cut short. Despite her efforts to address the situation, the haunting continued unabated. The child's spirit remained restless, and the ghostly presence in the schoolhouse grew more persistent. Miss Carter's attempts to contact the spirit and offer peace were met with silence. It was as if the spirit was trapped in a cycle of sadness and anger, unable to move on. The experience took a toll on Miss Carter, affecting her well-being and her ability to teach effectively. She found it increasingly difficult to maintain her focus and calm, and the constant presence of the ghostly child weighed heavily on her. The schoolhouse, once a place of learning and growth, had become a source of dread and unease. Eventually, Miss Carter made the difficult decision to leave the schoolhouse and seek a new position elsewhere. The haunting had taken its toll, and she could no longer endure the chilling presence that had become a constant companion. The schoolhouse remained, its dark secrets buried within its walls, waiting for the next person to uncover its haunting history.